Chapter 636. Selena recalled a small detail that happened when the three of them participated in Nox Network. She said, "Didn't you say that you could remotely control Nox Network's data processing center and turn it into a supercomputer?" A trace of uncertainty flashed across Jill's eyes as she said, "In theory, yes, but I've never done it before. Also, Nox Network's data processing center isn't big enough. I need the world's largest data processing center." Selena glanced at the phone in the control room and said, "Do your best. I'll inform John and ask him to release the news." Jill nodded. Her gaze lingered on the Yahoo browser icon on the computer screen for a while. She took a deep breath and opened a program's interface. Then this genius girl, who had not been too eye-catching compared to the other two girls in the movie, finally showed her valiant side. Her 10 fingers, which had turned into afterimages, danced on the keyboard in a frenzy. Strings of program codes appeared on the screen like flowing water. In order to show the visual impact of this scene as much as possible, Eric did not use different shots to stagger the operator's typing actions and the computer screen's shots. Instead, he used a close-up shot to film Charlie's entire operation and the computer screen. Eric believed that this scene would be enough to make all the geeky young men and women in the world mesmerized. After all, there were always computer geniuses with crazy hand speed, but most of them only existed in legends. How many people had actually seen such a person? In order to prepare for this short scene, Charlie had practiced her hand speed for half a year. Moreover, in order to achieve a more shocking and perfect effect, she had filmed this scene for a week. Obviously, the effect was clear. After this scene appeared on the screen, Eric, who was in the theater, could clearly hear many people exclaiming in amazement. A young man sitting not far away from him even lost his composure and shouted, "That's so cool!" The countdown timer on the screen was ticking away. A few minutes later, Jill, who was sweating profusely, finally pressed the confirm button in relief. The sci-fi data transmission scene flashed by. What appeared in front of the audience was a square metal and steel frame building next to a lake. The square building was covered with water cooling pipes and had a striking Yahoo logo. The camera cut into the interior of Yahoo's data center without stopping at all. It passed through the dense cluster of servers with flashing blue indicator lights and stopped in the control room of the data center. The white engineer, who had been listening to music, inadvertently glanced at the temperature control screen of the data center. When he saw the rapidly rising temperature curve that had reached the red line, he immediately got up in a panic and staggered out of the control room. Then the engineer standing in the server hall was stunned. He did not even realize that his earphones had fallen to the ground. In the panoramics panorama, because millions of CPU computing cores were operating at full capacity, all water and air cooling systems in the data center had automatically started. Along with the sharp high-temperature alarm, a terrifying roar as if the end of the world was approaching. The end, the world, the water cooling and air. In the remote desert base in Nevada, Jill glanced at the countdown that only had 1 minute and 22 seconds left. He murmured, "Faster, faster, faster." Finally, in the last 30 seconds of the countdown, a 32-digit password finally appeared on the interface that was rapidly flowing with data. Without hesitation, Jill quickly opened the virus control program and entered the long password in one go. Then he decisively pressed the stop button. Phew! Eric could almost hear the relieved voices of everyone in the theater. A wicked smile appeared on his face. There was no one around the two angels. How could the heroes who saved the world hear the cheers of victory? Sure enough, it was not over yet. However, after the virus self-activation program was stopped, just as Selena and Jill relaxed, a cold and rigid electronic synthetic female voice immediately rang out. "Warning, the base self-destruct program has been activated. 59, 58, 57. The two girls looked at each other and did not even have the chance to curse. They rushed out of the corridor like crazy. 30, 29, 28. When they reached the open space outside the base building, the haunting synthetic female voice was still ringing around them. If the base self-destructed, half a minute would not be enough for the two of them to safely escape the intense shock wave of the explosion. Before they could show any despair, a black Buick Boulevard rushed to the two girls. Lucini, who had scars on her face and messy hair, shouted, Get in. 10987. The black Buick Boulevard had just rushed out of the base less than 20 meters when a terrifying explosion rang out. A huge cloud of fire formed behind the Buick Boulevard. The intense shock wave of the explosion still enveloped the Buick Boulevard, and all the windows were shattered. However, the three girls who had curled up in advance and were protected by the body of the car were finally safe. After the explosion, the Buick Boulevard, which had lost all its windows, started up again. After a few bumps, the speed became more and more stable. In the end, it drove onto an endless desert road. Luciani's cute voice rang out again in a timely manner. My dad said that one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune. He has already gone to prison to enjoy a lifetime of leave. I heard that he has become a boss and is living a very good life. We have done such a big thing. Should we take a vacation too? Of course, definitely not a prison. Selena was still expressionless, but she did not ignore Luciani's nagging like before. Instead, she simply said, boring. Jill, who was leaning against the back seat, also said, not interested. I just want to find a place to have a good sleep. Lucaini was immediately displeased. Hey, after so many things, I thought we had become friends. Selena simply turned her head and looked out the window. Jill's thin lips curled up slightly. I don't make friends with stupid thieves who only know how to steal Buicks. Don't you think the Three Shields logo of Buick is cool? Besides, I occasionally steal Chevrolets. This time, the other two girls simply did not answer. Lucaini, who was once again ignored, was unwilling to let it go. Let's talk about the vacation. How about Hawaii? Maldives? Mediterranean? Don't tell me you want to go to the Caribbean? An impatient voice rang out again at the same time. Shut up. On the desert road, the shade of the Buick, which was gradually moving away, suddenly jolted, as if expressing its dissatisfaction with a certain chatterbox. The music gradually rang out, and the scene quickly froze on the empty desert road. After the subtitles slowly appeared, there was immediately a buzz of whispers in the theater. It was only because this was a special premiere that they did not immediately get up. However, there were also many viewers with keen intuition who continued to quietly watch the screen. Sure enough, when the last line of subtitles appeared, before the scene changed, Luciani's hilarious nagging had already rung out. I want a vacation, a real vacation. Hawaii sunshine, beaches, handsome guys, oh, and coconuts. I love coconut juice the most. But what the hell is this place? Hey, don't you think we should change to a more generous boss? At least he can be generous enough to let us see his true colors. The scene lit up, and three white figures wrapped in furry hiking suits appeared on a snowy mountain. They finally climbed to the edge of the cliff at the top of the mountain. The three girls were immediately attracted by the scene of flames soaring into the sky in a building similar to a military base on the opposite side of the cliff. They could faintly hear rapid gunshots. Lucaini stopped complaining and was dazed for a moment before she said, "It's so lively. It's a pity that we can't go over and say hello." As she spoke, on the runway of the opposite base, a propeller plane rushed out of the cliff and fell straight to the bottom of the valley. Another black figure, who was originally riding a motorcycle, also fell down. Selena suddenly said, "We're on the same boat." Lucaini stuck her head out and looked down. As she didn't dare get too close to the edge of the cliff that was covered in snow, she didn't notice the propeller plane and the person who fell off the cliff. Poor guy. But my dad once said that if the person who fell off the cliff can survive, he'll definitely be able to find the treasure at the bottom of the valley. Should we go down and see if he's dead? If he's not dead, Selena can kill him, and we can go find the treasure that originally belonged to him. Jill, who was standing on the far left, narrowed her naturally languid eyes and stared at the opposite side as if she was calculating something. After listening to Luciani's nagging, she said, "I bet that he should have died in the propeller plane." As soon as she said that, a loud buzzing sound quickly came from afar. In the flying snow, the propeller plane that had just fallen miraculously rushed out of the cliff and into the sky again. Luciani's eyes widened. She looked up with the other two girls and said, "I also bet that he should be alive in the propeller plane." The screen went black, and the movie ended. The lights in the screening room came on. Many of the audience were still immersed in the suspense caused by Lucenai's last sentence. After a few seconds, there was sporadic applause in the screening room, but then the applause quickly became continuous. "It was a great movie," Buffett, who was sitting next to Eric, nodded with a smile and said to Eric, "but there were a lot of things I didn't understand. It seems that I'm really old." "I'm very willing to answer any questions you have," Eric said with a smile. "But let's talk about today's theme." Buffett nodded. Obviously, what Eric was about to talk about was more interesting to him than the plot of the movie. Without participating in the final curtain call, Eric, Buffett, Chris, Katzenberg, Michael Lynn, and the female assistant left the theater silently and gathered in a high-end coffee shop. At this time, Eric didn't hide anymore and directly revealed his purpose. After hearing this, Buffett frowned and said, "You want Marvel Entertainment in Ronald Perlman's hands?" Eric nodded. "I know that Marvel is now in a mess. But even so, if Firefly takes the initiative to buy it, not only will Ronald Perlman ask for an exorbitant price, but it may also cause a fight among other film companies." Tom Murphy also asked, "Eric, is it for the copyright of those comic characters?" Eric nodded. "Yes, Ronald Perlman's actions this time gave me a very good hint. But if Firefly does it alone, it will be too obvious and will definitely arouse Marvel's vigilance. Everyone has their own companies, so I hope to get your help to take down Marvel Entertainment." Although in Buffett's view Marvel, which had been losing money for years and was heavily in debt, was almost worthless, he still asked patiently, "Eric, tell me about your plan first." "Of course." Eric nodded and told them about the plan that he had thought through in detail. The total value of the entire Marvel Entertainment at this time was less than $500 million, but after Eric told them about his plan and said that some of the copyright of Marvel's characters had the box office potential of Warner's Batman, everyone said that they would do their best to cooperate with Eric's subsequent plan. An ingenious popcorn movie. The three heroines completely get rid of the fixed-face image of women in Hollywood movies with their own outstanding acting skills, and give the audience a visual feast that is a combination of feeling and strength. The next day, a famous film critic in the Los Angeles Times gave Thunderbolt such a high evaluation and gave the movie 5 stars, which was rare. The reason given by the critic, who rarely gave full marks, was that Thunderbolt was the first very successful all-female action movie in Hollywood history. Almost at the same time, the plot, foreshadowing, and Easter eggs in Thunderbolt all became the focus of the media's heated discussion. The media made all kinds of speculations about why the female lead, Selena, appeared in the underground boxing ring, the meaning of the conversation between Selena and John at the beginning, the father that Lucy often mentioned, and her hobby of stealing Buick cars. They also hoped that the production company could reveal these small details in the sequel. Of course, there were praises and discussions, but at the same time, there were also doubts. On the day Thunderbolt was released, as the CEO of Oracle, Larry Ellison, who had the title of Madman, jumped out and publicly criticized Eric for the super mistakes in the movie. Larry Ellison said that the world's largest data processing center should be Oracle's data center in Washington state. However, as soon as Larry Ellison said this, Oracle's old rival, Microsoft, was immediately dissatisfied. Microsoft's spokesperson immediately said that Microsoft's data center was the largest. Then IBM, Sun, and other companies jumped out one after another. It was very lively for a while. While several high-tech companies were arguing about whose data center was the largest, a few days later, the well-known Hollywood Reporter quickly stirred up another wave of discussion with an article called "The Real Identity of Charlie." Chapter 637. While Thunderbolt is giving fans a visual feast of hot pink, it also leaves us with many interesting hidden details. We can also see a character and world setting that is completely different from the TV series. It's conceivable that this is a foreshadowing by the ambitious producers for the sequel. While fans of the James Bond series are discussing whether the black figure flying the propeller plane at the end of the movie is the new James Bond, while gossip magazines are debating whether Penelope Cruz's character, Lucini Baker, has an daddy complex, while geeky youths are busy studying the real and complex exhaustive algorithm at the end of the movie, perhaps many people have overlooked a very hidden detail. 3 minutes into the movie, the contact, John, played by Morgan Freeman, blackmails Lucchini by saying in a seemingly casual manner, "I'll give you 30 minutes to drive to 10880 Malibu, or I'll hand you over to the police along with these photos." After watching the entire movie, we didn't see any more details about Malibu 10880. The movie also didn't explain why John asked Lucchini to drive the Buick to Malibu 10880. After some investigation, we found that Malibu doesn't have an apartment number 10880 in real life. So this very abrupt conversation at first glance seems to be a completely useless, redundant plot. But is that really the case? As we all know, the plot of Thunderbolt is very strict. The producers are even more meticulous in the details. Even the program code that the genius girl, Jill Monroe, entered at the end of the movie is said to be written by Yahoo's CTO, Steve Mitnick. Then, according to this train of thought, in the most important opening stage of the movie, it is absolutely impossible for there to be a meaningless conversation. After many investigations by the magazine's reporters, we finally found the true face of Malibu 10880. Perhaps many readers have already noticed the eye-catching seashell villa photo in the illustration of this article and made related guesses. That's right, the so-called Malibu 10880 is Eric Williams' luxurious private manor in Malibu. According to the clues provided by many insiders, although the apartment number of the Pointy Corner Manor is not 10880, Eric Williams has referred to the Pointy Corner Manor as 10,880 more than once. Moreover, we found the most direct evidence. In a project document of the architectural design company in charge of the Pointy Corner Manor project, the code of the Freedom City Villa project is 10,880. For the time being, let's not discuss why Selina Gatler, played by Kate Beckinsale, allowed herself to indulge in the cruel and fatal fights in the underground boxing ring. Nor do we want to find out what happened to Selina and her former partner. These behind-the-scenes stories are likely to appear in the prequel or the plot of the movie. Back to the movie, after the formation of the new angel group, the first thing the three angels had to do was naturally to meet their boss. Although this mysterious boss did not reveal his true face, according to this logic, John's purpose of getting Lucchini to drive to the fictional 10880 was explained. At the very least, in this movie, the identity of the owner of 10,880 is undoubtedly hinting at the boss of the detective company, Charlie Townsend, who did not appear in the entire movie. And according to the existence of 10,880 in the real world, it's not difficult for us to discover that the ubiquitous Charlie Townsend in the movie is undoubtedly Eric Williams' incarnation in Thunderbolt. Perhaps as the screenwriter of the movie version of Thunderbolt, Eric Williams set up this little plot on a whim, but when we turn our attention to today's Hollywood, many people will be surprised to find that the young boy who made a name for himself with Home Alone 6 years ago is now like the ubiquitous Charlie Townsend in Thunderbolt. His influence has spread across half of Hollywood, and this influence is even more vivid in this year's summer movies. Starting from the end of May, all the box office successes such as Saving Private Ryan, True Lies, The Lion King, and Thunderbolt, whether or not they are produced and distributed by Firefly Group, they more or less carry the personal imprint of Eric Williams. And the upcoming Dumb and Melon 2 and Men in Black are also from Eric Williams. The personal influence of this new Hollywood mogul has already covered 4 of the 7 major film companies: Firefly, MGM, Columbia, and Fox. This terrifying influence is almost beyond any movie mogul in Hollywood's century-old history. Because this miraculous young mogul is currently less than 25 years old, it's not difficult for us to make a hypothesis that perhaps one day in the future, Eric Williams will completely unify Hollywood and become the veritable king of Hollywood. Eric put the article that had just appeared 2 days ago and had already been reprinted by many newspapers on his desk. He shook his head and smiled, then continued to read other information. After a week of screening, Thunderbolt had easily won more than $49 million at the box office. Although this box office could not be compared to the first week of films such as The Mummy and Saving Private Ryan, the hot topic of this female action blockbuster was far more popular than the few popular films of the previous month. The reason why the box office of Thunderbolt was low was not because the popularity of the summer had passed, and it was definitely not because of factors such as the film's scheduling or the film's quality. Just like how Buffett said that he did not understand some of the plot at the premiere, it was because the movie involved a lot of high-tech plots that the elderly and children could not understand. Thunderbolt did not attract audiences of all ages, but it was because of these cool high-tech plots that the main audience of the movie was mainly teenagers between the ages of 14 and 28, and it had an extraordinary impact on this group of people. Moreover, due to the high reputation and popularity of the movie, the box office of Thunderbolt, compared to the first week, the box office of Thunderbolt, instead the box office of the second week of Thunderbolt. Box office statistics agencies predicted that the box office of Thunderbolt could easily exceed $50 million in 2 weeks. Thunderbolt was also very popular in some of the overseas box office markets that were released at the same time as North America, especially in Japan where it was released at the same time. As a country where manga was popular among the people, Selena's manga-esque image in the movie made a lot of Japanese manga otakus excited. The box office of the movie in Japan was even close to that of North America, reaching $46 million. Soon after, Selena's real-life figurines were sold out in Japan along with the Thunderbolt Beauties series that were sold out. In just a week, the originally unknown Kate became the most popular Western female celebrity in Japan, and a lot of offers for collaborations and endorsements were sent to ICM. Thanks to the outstanding results of Thunderbolt, MGM was finally able to escape from the cliff of bankruptcy. The European investors who were expecting huge returns were also overjoyed. After the box office of Thunderbolt, both parties could not wait to contact Eric, hoping to start preparing for the sequel as soon as possible. At the same time, 2 other companies that had nothing to do with the movie industry also gained unexpected benefits. Within a week of the movie's release, Yahoo's online email users increased by 1 million due to the movie's strong advertising campaign. These users were basically new and valuable internet users. The daily number of visitors to Yahoo's portal also increased significantly in a short period of time. On July 1, YCR, the instant messaging software officially launched by Yahoo Incorporated, reached a terrifying exponential growth rate. Riding on the momentum of Thunderbolt Charming Baby, the number of users of this trendy and avant-garde long-distance messaging software in this era exceeded 10 million within a week. Although they had made ample preparations beforehand, this time, Yahoo was still unable to withstand the huge data flow pressure brought about by the skyrocketing number of YCR users. On the evening of July 5, there was a temporary server outage. Although it was inevitable that several high-tech giants who were vying for the title of the world's largest data processing center would mock them, it did not dampen the users' enthusiasm. The other company that benefited was, without a doubt, Buick Automobile Company. Buick, which was originally focused on business models and was not very popular among young people, had more than doubled its sales within a week of the release of Thunderbolt. Other than the Buick Boulevard that appeared many times in the movie, the sales of several other models under Buick increased significantly. With the influence of Thunderbolt, Buick not only opened up the young consumer market that had been stagnant for a long time, but it was also expected that the sales of cars in the second half of 1994 would increase by at least 30%. It was worth mentioning that Buick was different from Lamborghini and Ferrari, which could only sell a few thousand units a year. This mid-range brand under the General Motors Group had already sold more than 1 million units worldwide in the 1980s, with annual sales reaching tens of billions of US dollars. Therefore, one could imagine how much extra profit Buick would gain from a 30% increase in sales. Back then, Buick only reluctantly forked out $5 million for the implantation fee because of the line in the movie, "Don't you think Buick's Three Shields logo is cool?" However, after the movie was released, the president of Buick immediately contacted MGM, who was in charge of the movie's distribution, and said that he would add an additional $20 million for joint promotion with the movie. In the past, only the 007 series could enjoy this kind of treatment. Buick's competitors, Ford, Chevrolet, and even Japan's Toyota, Honda, and other car brands also contacted the producers, trying to get the exclusive brand implantation rights for the sequel of Thunderbolt. The sound of the office door being knocked on woke Eric up from his reading. He answered and the door was gently pushed open. Eric looked at the female assistant in a professional suit coming in. He smiled and waved the copy of Hollywood Reporter that he had just read and asked with a smile, "Kelly, do you think I can unify Hollywood?" From the perspective of the anti-monopoly law, it's impossible. Kelly held a stack of documents and sat down opposite Eric. She said, "But from the perspective of a miracle, it's not necessarily true." Eric said, "I can tell that your words are definitely praising me, not using me as a target like this article, right?" Kelly showed a feminine and intellectual smile and said, "Yes, but this article also helped Firefly a lot." According to the finance department's estimation, because of the merger with ABC, the group's financial report for the first half of the year needs to be delayed until the beginning of next month. The appearance of this article has played the same role as the beautiful financial report. The impact caused by the reform of the hand-drawn animation department is now minimal. All the sales of long-term bonds are expected to be completed before the end of the month. Eric asked, "Speaking of this, is there any movement from Peter Schneider and Roy Disney?" "I'm here to tell you about this." Kelly handed a document in her hand to Eric and said, "This is their condition." Eric flipped open the document and skimmed through it. In addition to a series of expected requests such as a substantial increase in the salary of the hand-drawn animation department and the department's budget, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney also requested for the construction of a Disney animation campus comparable to Pixar's, and for them to enjoy the same rights as Pixar's. Eric closed the document and said with a faint sneer on his face, "They want to double the employee's salary as soon as they open their mouths. They have no intention of letting this matter end immediately." Kelly replied, "Since they've chosen to go against Ron Perelman will also need enough time to unite the creditors. It just so happens that we also need enough time to make arrangements," Eric suddenly said with a smile. "This is their last contribution to Firefly." Kelly felt a little sad for Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, especially Peter Schneider. This high-level animation department executive was actually quite capable. If the department was reformed according to Eric's plan, he might have a chance to get a higher position in Firefly in the future. But now, even if the hand-drawn animation department found a new owner, once his betrayal today was exposed, he would definitely be kicked out by the new owner. Firefly absolutely had no obligation to hide this matter for Peter Schneider. P.S. Still 2 updates. The next one will be late. Star. Chapter 638. Mr. Katzenberg has personally operated a private equity fund under the group to start your plan. Hathaway, State Street Global, and Firefly Investments are also following up. If we don't want to be noticed by Marvel, we will need about a month. Kelly handed over the next document and said, "Also, several newspaper groups have made a second round of offers for our paper assets. The current highest bid is $1.4 billion from Condé Nast." Eric quickly read the document in his hand and said, "Let Jeffrey start the acquisition negotiations. Yahoo Network and AOL both need a lot of money. Tell Jeffrey that he doesn't need to haggle too much over the price. As long as the price reaches the estimated $1.5 billion, it will be fine. But I want the buyer to pay in cash as soon as possible." Kelly nodded and wrote it down on the memo. Then she looked up and said, "That's all for serious business." Eric looked at the closed office door and joked, "Do you want to do something indecent here?" Kelly rolled her eyes at him and handed the last document to Eric. She said, "This is from Miss Murdoch. The New York Post was going to publish it tomorrow, but she stopped it. She said you can deal with it yourself. She can stop the New York Post's report, but she can't control other newspapers. In addition, there is a copy of the file related to this news manuscript." Eric looked at the title of the news manuscript, "The Dark Past of a Genius Girl." His eyes suddenly narrowed. When he saw Charlie's name in the article, Eric could almost guess the general content. After reading the article roughly, Eric confirmed his judgment. In the original Spacetime, Charlie was nominated for the Best Actress Oscar for The Female Devil. In the subsequent media public relations war, The news that Charlie's biological father was shot to death by her mother when she was 15 years old was once again hyped up by the media. Charlie, who was originally a simple victim, was even forced to use the word patricide by the unscrupulous media. Eric did not pay much attention to that. His own result was that Charlie still won the Best Actress Oscar. Now, perhaps it was because Fox's Dumb and Melon 2 was about to be released, but the box office momentum of Thunderbolt Charming Baby did not show any signs of weakening. The New York Post dug up this news from somewhere, so they had the same idea as the media in his previous life. However, perhaps they were taking Firefly's side into consideration, so the article did not deliberately distort the facts like in the original Spacetime. However, the tendentious hints between the lines would still make people daydream. Since this matter has been dug up by the media, it definitely can't be hidden. Eric thought for a while, then tore off a piece of sticky paper and wrote a line of words. He handed it to Kelly and said, "Talk to ICM personally. Also, ask the Public Relations Department to cooperate as much as possible. Follow this guideline and guide the Public Relations Department. I don't want to see any messy news appearing." Kelly took the note from Eric and saw the words, "A regrettable family tragedy. A strong girl who walked out of the shadows." She nodded and said, "MGM CEO Frank Marcheso doesn't know the phone number here, so he called me. He wants to arrange a time to talk to you about Thunderbolt Charming Baby." MGM hopes to release 2 sequels of Thunderbolt Charming Baby at the same time. Let them talk to Jeffrey about this. After they're done discussing. Eric was halfway through his sentence when he looked up and asked, "Did something happen?" Kelly was just about to speak when Eric suddenly said, "Oh, it must be Penny and the other 2. Kelly nodded. The person in charge of DreamWorks wants to sign a contract with Miss Cruz and the other 3 for the next 2 sequels at once. However, Miss Michelle Simmons from ICM hasn't given a response. Eric said, "I'll help ask the 3 of them what they're thinking. Let MGM rest assured and focus on the release." In the next few days, with the cooperation of Firefly's Public Relations Department, ICM Management Company, and MGM, news about Charlie's past as a young girl began to appear in the media. However, most of the news put Charlie completely from the perspective of a victim and expressed full sympathy. At the same time, they fully publicized Charlie's experience of wandering in Hollywood alone. They completely molded the girl into an independent and self-reliant girl who walked out of the shadows successfully. The effect of the first impression of ordinary people was very strong. Since such an idea was instilled in them at the first moment, then if there were any articles slandering Charlie in the media in the future, it would only arouse the disgust of most people. At the same time, Charlie's popularity, who originally had a weaker presence in the Break-In Charming Baby trio, had also benefited from the disaster by a large margin. In the second week of July, Fox's Dumb and Melon 2 was also officially released. However, due to the impact of the box office decline of The Lion King and Break-In Charming Baby, Dumb and Melon 2 only grossed $33 million in the first 3 days of the first weekend, which was $4 million lower than Break-In Charming Baby. The first week's box office was expected to stop at $45 million. However, compared to Break-In Charming Baby, which cost more than $80 million, the biggest cost of this vulgar comedy was only Jim Carrey's salary. The total production budget was less than $40 million. Therefore, Fox still made a lot of money from this film. After returning to Los Angeles from Boston at the end of May, Eric went through more than a month of intense work. He checked most of the film projects that he needed to take care of personally, and his schedule gradually became more relaxed. In addition to paying attention to the layout of taking over Marvel Entertainment, he also spent more time preparing for the Victoria's Secret show. In the studio of the Victoria's Secret show, Eric had just sent away the head of Firefly's music department, who had sent a stack of singers' cassettes. The 3 girls, who had just returned to Los Angeles after the European and East Asian promotional tour, and Penelope's sister, Monica, walked into his office together. Penelope and Kate were each holding a set of gorgeous angel wings in their hands. After greeting Eric, Penelope couldn't wait to show a set of butterfly wings behind her back. She said, "Eric, are these the angel outfits to be worn at the Victoria's Secret show? They're so beautiful." Eric smiled as he watched the two girls put on the angel wings. He said, "You must have taken them from the shelf by the door of my office. These are all waste products to be disposed of. The real angel wings that are chosen are kept in the vault." Kate asked curiously, "These are already so beautiful. The chosen ones must be even more stunning. Can we take a look?" Eric shook his head and said, "I'll give you a few tickets when the time comes. No one is allowed to see them now." Kate stuck her tongue out at Eric and said, "So stingy." Eric didn't answer. He looked at Charlie, who had been very quiet since she came in. It was obvious that she had something on her mind. He joked, "Charlie, are you planning to steal Kate's role in the sequel?" "No, of course not." Charlie hurriedly shook her head. Eric was about to continue, but when Penelope heard Eric mention the movie, she couldn't wait to gossip. She hugged Kate and said, "Eric, you don't know. When we went to Tokyo to promote the movie, a man saw Kate at the scene and cried on the spot. He even wanted to rush up the stage while crying. He scared the hell out of us." Kate pushed Penelope away unhappily and said, "What makes you think that he came for me? Maybe he wanted to pounce on you." Penelope laughed and said, "Although I didn't understand that guy's Japanese, everyone at the scene could hear the pronunciation of Selena clearly." Eric said, "I've already seen it in the newspaper. Kate is now the most popular Western actress in Japan. How do you feel?" Kate shook her head and said, "Not very good. The people from that country always give me a weird feeling. This is because of cultural differences. People from different countries and ethnicities will have this feeling when they look at outsiders. Otherwise, there wouldn't be racial discrimination." Eric explained briefly and said, "Let's not talk about this. Someone asked me to ask, what are the three of your plans for the sequel?" The three girls looked at each other and didn't speak for a while. Eric pointed at Penelope and said, "Penny, you tell them." "Eric, we don't mind making a sequel, but we don't want to rush the two sequels. If we make one a year, our roles will definitely be set." Eric remembered that MGM wanted to add the two sequels to DreamWorks' 10-film plan. The original 10-film plan was planned to be made within 3 years. After hearing Penelope's answer, Eric more or less understood. Tapping the table lightly, he thought for a while. Seeing the three girls looking at him more and more nervously, Eric suddenly smiled and said, "You have so little confidence in me. Are you worried that I'll sell you?" Although Eric was very gentle in life, when it came to movies, he was often very aggressive. The three girls were really worried that Eric would force them to make one a year. Hearing Eric's words, Kate, who was the smartest, relaxed. She laughed and said, "Who asked you to do so many bad things?" Eric smiled and said, "Looks like I need to find time to ask you to help me remember what bad things I've done." Kate was stunned. Her little brain quickly tried to recall. For a moment, she couldn't remember anything, but she still snorted unhappily. Eric didn't care and patiently explained, "You must be thinking too much. In that case, we'll change it to one every 2 years. In fact, the production plan of any film company in Hollywood is not fixed. It involves tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. The production process can't be too careful. It's normal for all kinds of changes to happen during the production. Although the original agreement was to make 10 films in 3 years, if it can't be completed in the end for various reasons, the remaining projects will either be cancelled or delayed. Take Spielberg, for example. He still owes Universal a few movie contracts. It's said that they are contracts from more than 10 years ago. Maybe he'll just forget about it." Penelope rolled her eyes and asked, "Then what about our pay?" "Your pay has nothing to do with me." Eric laughed again. Although Firefly has 30% of the profits in DreamWorks, the movie's production funds are from Europe. So just let Michelle help you negotiate. The higher you can get, the better. But don't go overboard. Be careful or we'll break up." Kate asked, "How much do you think we should ask for?" Eric thought for a while and said, "Let's package the two sequels at $12 million each. Don't mention the split. After all, there are 3 of you. An average of $18 million per film is already a sky-high price. The producers still have to invite other actors. The total cost of the actors' pay may be $25 million. If your asking price is too high, The producers can only reduce the shooting budget. This will definitely affect the quality of the sequels. It'll do you more harm than good. Eric said it casually, but even Charlie, who had been a little worried, couldn't help but be speechless. She laughed for the first time since she came to this office. However, the girl quickly restrained her expression and glared at Eric. She said, "Is this how you coax girls in private?" "Not necessarily. It depends on the person. Take you for example. You have to do the opposite. Using a term from the Eastern art of war, it's called loosening the reins only to grasp them better." Eric pointed outside the door with a smile and continued, speaking with assurance. "When it comes to Kate, this kind of proud little girl, you have to be a little more forceful. When it comes to Penny, you don't have to use any method." "You're such a bastard." Charlie couldn't help but laugh again. However, the girl had unknowingly moved to the door. Then, under Eric's surprised gaze, Charlie reached out and locked the office door. Then she walked toward Eric aggressively. Eric was about to get up in confusion, but Charlie pressed him down on the wide leather chair. Then, the girl's slender body leaned forward, and she reached out to pull Eric's tie like a kitten that suddenly went crazy. However, the panic hidden in the girl's expression completely betrayed her. Eric was about to say something when Charlie pulled off the tie and put it in front of Eric's eyes like a blindfold. Then, she kissed him clumsily with her cold, thin lips. When the thin lips that were trembling because of nervousness left him, Eric subconsciously joked, "Charlie, you have to know that in America, some crimes aren't just targeted at men." However, as soon as he said this, Eric suddenly felt a hard bite on his shoulder. The man gasped. The girl's voice trembled slightly, but she still said with hatred, "Who told you to deliberately ignore me?" "My queen, this is the office. Why don't we talk at home?" "Don't worry, I definitely won't let you off." "Shut up, don't move." Star. Chapter 639. Charlie opened her eyes and realized that she was lying on the sofa with a blanket covering her body. The sky outside the window was obviously dark. Only a desk lamp was lit in this simple office separated by a partition. The figure behind the desk was quietly flipping through something with his head lowered. Thinking of her crazy actions in the afternoon, Charlie secretly pulled the blanket over her body, wanting to cover her burning face. "You're awake?" Eric's sudden voice startled Charlize. After a long while the girl murmured, "Yes." Looking at Charlie's flustered appearance as she instantly pulled the blanket over her head, Eric smiled gently, and considerately did not mention what happened in the afternoon. He said, "It's almost 8 o'clock now. If you plan to spend the night here, the two of us can only squeeze on the sofa." "I'm not." Charlie subconsciously wanted to refute, but the moment the words left her mouth, she quickly changed the topic. "Have Kate and the rest left?" "They left a long time ago," Eric said as he got up and turned on the office lights. He walked to Charlie's side and said, "Get up, I've already booked a restaurant. Let's go have dinner together." The bright light of the fluorescent lights made Charlie subconsciously squint her eyes. Looking at the figure of the man beside her, a strong sense of embarrassment arose in her heart again. She said, "You go out, I want to put on my clothes." "Okay, Your Majesty." Eric could not help but tease her. He placed Charlie's clothes on the coffee table beside the sofa, turned around and walked out of the office. Charlie stared at the door. After a while, she stretched out her right arm from under the blanket and tried to reach for the clothes beside her. However, just as she stretched out her arm, Charlie saw a tie that she used to commit a crime a few hours ago appear on her wrist. Some crazy and confusing images rushed into her mind. Charlie hurriedly retracted her arm and quickly took off the tie on her wrist. Because of her crazy actions in the afternoon, Charlie was very reserved at the beginning of dinner. However, under Eric's patient livening up the atmosphere, Charlie quickly relaxed. When the two of them left the restaurant, Charlie even plucked up the courage to take the initiative to hold Eric's arm. The dinner venue was Venice Beach. After dinner, it was almost 11 o'clock, but the pedestrian street near the sea was still very lively. Ever since the release of Break-In, the three girls had become the focus of the paparazzi. However, Charlie's whereabouts that night were out of everyone's expectations. coupled with Eric's bodyguard's skillful anti-stalking methods. The two left the restaurant after dinner and simply covered themselves with a baseball cap. Coupled with the dim light at night, they didn't encounter any harassment even after walking for a long distance on the pedestrian street. After accompanying Charlie for a while, Eric looked at his watch and said to the girl, "I'll send you back. It's late." Charlie's footsteps faltered as he mumbled, "I don't want to go back tonight." Charlie was still living with Kate. Eric could guess why she was unwilling to go back. He smiled and said, "Then come to my place." Charlie shook her head and said, I don't want to go to your place either. In any case, I won't go to your place." Recalling Charlie's strong personality in his previous life, Eric could understand why she rejected him. Looking around, Eric pointed at a cinema and said, "Then I'll treat you to a movie. How about Break-In? It's very popular recently." Charlie, who was a little nervous, was amused by Eric's tone and said, "Who would watch their own movie?" Eric smiled and said, "Me? I always watch my own movies many times. Aren't I narcissistic?" "You're clearly working." By the way, Eric suddenly knocked his forehead and said, "I almost forgot that I acted in another movie. I don't know if I can buy tickets in this theater. There don't seem to be many midnight shows in Colombia." Noticing Charlie's confusion, Eric explained, "Men in Black. You know about it, right? It's the premiere today, but I didn't go. The midnight show should have started by now." Charlie was stunned. She tightened her grip on Eric's arm and asked in a low voice, "You didn't go to the premiere because you were waiting for me?" "Yeah, aren't you very touched? In your dreams." Charlie pinched Eric lightly and said, "We're even now. I won't be grateful to you." Eric had a hurt expression as he held his chest and said, "Her Majesty is really heartless." "Don't call me that again." Charlie pinched harder but quickly let go of Eric. She walked towards the cinema and said, "I'll buy the tickets. It's my treat." Although it was a little late, Eric and Charlie were lucky enough to get tickets for the midnight show of Men in Black. Eric had adopted the setting of the Zerg invasion in the original Men in Black. The two male leads were still Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones. In addition, Eric had given the important role of the female forensic doctor to Catherine Zeta-Jones, whom he had not seen for a long time. This beautiful Welsh woman's temperament was very similar to that of the original Linda Fiorentino. Of course, Eric had the idea of keeping the goodies within the family. Like everyone else in the cinema, Charlie was quickly immersed in the novel setting and the comedic performances of the characters. However, half an hour later, Charlie remembered Eric's words and asked, "Didn't you say that you also acted in a role? Why haven't I seen you yet?" Eric smiled mischievously and said, "You'll see it in 5 minutes." Charlie saw that Eric did not answer, so she turned to the screen again. In the plot, because Jay learned that there were aliens everywhere around him, his worldview was completely refreshed. He sat on a bench by the Manhattan River for a night. Although he did not have the noble ideal of protecting the world because of a little girl's innocent smile, he finally decided to join the Men in Black. Then he was taken to the secret headquarters of the Men in Black by Kay. After a mysterious sphere caused a commotion in the hall of the Men in Black's headquarters, Kay took Jay to the alien monitoring room in the headquarters. Then, after the big screen monitoring the aliens appeared, everyone in the cinema laughed. Charlie, who had a smile on her face, finally understood what Eric meant when she said that she also acted in a role in the movie. Just like the original version, the aliens that appeared on the big screen were all public figures that Americans were familiar with, such as Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and so on. Of course, Eric would definitely not be able to escape. Also, in the original, Jay's conversation about his childhood teacher was completely changed. On the screen, Kay said, "Everyone on the screen is an alien. In public, they act normal, but in private, well, you must already know." Jay stared at the big screen and exclaimed, "Oh my God." Kay said, "Very surprised, right?" No, it's very reasonable." Jay pointed to a corner of the screen and said seriously, "I never thought that Eric Williams was from Earth. Look at what he has done over the years. It's crazy." Kay explained, "Eric Williams is from Pandora. 6 years ago, his spaceship accidentally crashed on Earth. In order to raise enough money to repair the spaceship, he used his racial talent to become a movie director. Jay said with a look of realization, "Spaceship, I know. It must be in Malibu. I've always felt that the Shell Villa looked like a spaceship." Kay nodded and said, "That's right, Malibu 10880. As soon as Agent Kay said this in the movie, there was a burst of laughter in the theater. After all, because of the article in The Hollywood Reporter that was widely reprinted recently, the number 10,880 was deeply ingrained in people's minds. But the teasing did not end there. Following Kay's explanation, Eric's close-up appeared on the big screen. In the picture, Eric was basically no different from an ordinary person, but there were two comedic sky blue antennae on his head. Moreover, at this time, the Pandoran Eric was angrily holding up a tax collection notice and roaring at the other two men in black in front of him. "I have a green card, I'm a law-abiding citizen. I've already paid 35% of my personal income tax. Why should I pay this damn alien immigration tax? Are aliens not human? You're discriminating, racial discrimination. I have a dream." Just as Eric was about to imitate Martin Luther King and give a speech, one of the men in black in the surveillance camera completely lost his patience and punched Eric in the nose. Eric fell back. Then Agent J nodded enviously and said with certainty, "If the men in black can beat up Eric Williams, I'll join." After the teasing ended, like the other audiences in the theater, Charlie had already collapsed on Eric. Eric gently patted Charlie's back and said, "You don't have to be so dramatic." "Haha, Eric, are you really an alien?" Charlie sat up with the help of Eric's arm and continued to ask with a smile. Eric moved closer to Charlie's ear and said, "Didn't you check it yourself this afternoon?" Charlie's face blushed and spat, but she still curiously reached out her little hand and touched Eric's head, as if looking for traces of the two antennae. Eric smiled and slapped Charlie's curious little hand away and said, "Don't look for it, I put the antennae at home. If you want to see it, you can come with me to Malibu 10880. Haha. P.S. Next update will be later." Chapter 640. While Men in Black raked in US $76 million at the box office in the first week, the black super SWAT in the film also caused a trend of imitation throughout society, just like in his previous life. In the following period, the popularity of black clothes and sunglasses was like the trench coat and toothpicks of Broma, after the release of Heroes on the Other Side of the Ocean. Although the release time was in the hot summer, it was still difficult to stop the enthusiasm of fans wearing black clothes and sunglasses on the streets. Since then, a proprietary term, black super mask, gradually became popular in the media. At the same time, the movie also caused a new round of discussion about aliens in the media because of the ubiquitous extraterrestrial ridicule of characters and events in reality. And the first to bear the brunt, the hottest topic of discussion was, without a doubt, Eric the Pandoran. After all, Eric started from scratch as an ordinary high school student and became a media tycoon with tens of billions of dollars in just 6 years. This kind of miraculous life experience was unprecedented in the entire history of mankind. Countless media outlets then began to dig into Eric's characteristics that matched the characteristics of aliens. Even Eric's more fickle character became evidence of an alien's attempt at racial invasion in the tabloids. Some people even sent a request to the White House to investigate Eric's alien identity. There was also no lack of people who used Eric's wealth at this time to ask the federal government to levy an alien immigration management tax on Eric. Of course, these requests would not receive any response. In the end, even the always serious New York Times could not help but publish an article on the important page to join in the fun. Eric Williams satisfied the gossip lovers of the universe with a brilliant and crazy self-ridicule. A famous film critic on Buffett's Washington Post also used a line in the movie to tease, "If I can see Eric Williams get beaten up, I'm willing to pay $4. What was more interesting was that after Men in Black's peripheral products began to be sold, the most popular product was not the cool weapon models, nor the variety of alien figurines, but the pair of sky blue antennae on Eric's head in less than 30 seconds of the shot. In addition to a large number of fans buying them for collection or wearing them to parties, even some parents liked to buy a pair of sky blue antennae as a gift for their children, perhaps because they wanted their children to be as good as Eric. However, after the box office explosion of Men in Black, a series of problems about the sequel also came. Although Sony Columbia Pictures had made a name for itself by releasing several films with Firefly in the past 2 years, under the wasteful management of Peter Guber, the company was still in a state of loss year after year. Originally, Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Broken Arrow were 2 projects from Firefly, so they didn't cause much of a stir in terms of profit distribution. However, the success of Men in Black clearly surpassed Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Broken Arrow, and the profits from the sequel were undoubtedly more lucrative. Therefore, the 40-60 split between Columbia and Firefly caught the attention of Sony. This was because the film copyright of Men in Black originally belonged to Columbia Pictures. However, after cooperating with Firefly, Columbia not only lost most of the profits that they should have enjoyed alone, but they also lost 60% of the copyright. Most importantly, according to the original agreement, if the sequel development was delayed for a long time, Columbia would even lose the remaining 40% of the copyright. If the sequel development went smoothly, it would not be a big deal. Since they chose to sign the contract, Sony could only continue to cooperate with Firefly. But after the success of Men in Black, including the film director, the 2 male leads, the producer, and even the original comic company of Men in Black, jumped out one after another, trying to get a share of the profits in the sequel. In the face of this situation, Firefly would certainly not compromise. If the profit sharing could not be reached, at most, everyone would just drag it out. Firefly was not afraid of a lawsuit. Anyway, Firefly's film company did not lack popular film projects. Firefly's main release schedule was even 3 years later, but Columbia Pictures could not afford to drag it out. After Sony bought this company, not only did they not get a single cent of profit, but they also did not promote their own video format. With the arrival of the DVD era, if Columbia continued to lose money, this film company would definitely become more and more useless. Moreover, Sony gradually realized that something was wrong. However, the Japanese did not immediately fall out with Firefly, but the Sony executives began to put pressure on Peter Guber, trying to get Peter Guber to fight for the benefits that Columbia deserved. Peter Guber himself also had a premonition that he would not be able to sit in this position for long. Of course, he also knew how bad Columbia was. After the cooperation with Firefly ended, it was impossible to continue to stay in this position. However, because there were still 2 blockbusters, Game of the Brave and Mission Impossible, to be released in the second half of the year, although Peter Guber himself had reaped enough benefits in the past few years, he still hoped that after the 2 films were released at the end of the year, according to the bonus contract signed at the beginning of the year, he would get the last huge bonus with the success of these 2 films before leaving Columbia. So, in just a few days, Peter Guber almost pestered several senior executives of Firefly, and even found Eric, who had been in the Victoria's Secret show recently. Looking at the busy crowd around him, especially the slim models trying on clothes, Peter Guber, who was standing next to a workbench, did not forget to chatter to Eric. "Eric, how about this? We can sign a subsidiary agreement, including the director and the 2 lead actors of Men in Black. Only after the sequel's profits reach a certain level can they get a bonus. We can raise this standard. In this way, if the sequel is a big success again, even if we give more benefits to the main creators, we will still make a profit." Eric continued to show the designer a set of angel clothes, completely ignoring Peter Guber, and said, "Peter, you should know how high the pay in Hollywood has risen. Sony is rich and doesn't care about this, but we, the natives of Hollywood, have to look at the long term, right?" Chapter 641. Eric, of course I know that the salary of stars is a bit too high, but I recently heard that Firefly Pictures has just launched James Cameron's new film, Titanic. The production budget of this film is $150 million US. Since Firefly can budget $150 million US for such a high-risk disaster film, why aren't they willing to make some concessions for the sequel of Men in Black? Even if we meet the requirements of the main creators now, the final production budget will not exceed $150 million US. Eric looked at Peter Guber and said, "Peter, let's not talk about Men in Black for now. Do you know why I'm willing to let James overspend again and again? Peter Guber shrugged. Eric did not expect Peter Guber to answer, so he said, because I'm very sure that every cent James spends is to make the film as good as possible, and not to spend a lot of money to invite stars who are overpaid. Peter Guber tried to refute, but aren't we inviting stars to make the film more appealing at the box office? Of course, I don't deny that, Eric said. But most of the time it's not worth it. Take Beverly Detective 3 and Law Enforcement, for example. Paramount and Warner Brothers spent a large amount of their budget on the remuneration of the protagonists. Eddie Murphy and Kevin Costner not only received a fixed remuneration of more than $15 million at the same time, but they also enjoyed a very high profit-sharing agreement. But the result, you must have seen it for yourself. Peter Guber said, Eric, this is just an accident, and Miss Kidman's salary from The Mummy is even more shocking. Nicole completely gave up the fixed salary to get the corresponding profit-sharing agreement. If The Mummy fails at the box office, Nicole won't get a single cent, Eric said. And James, every time he overspends, he will take the initiative to give up his director's salary to reduce the budget burden of the film company. But those stars, not only do they get a high salary of tens of millions of US dollars, but they also ask for more profit sharing. But they enjoy so many benefits, but they will not take any risks for the film company. Just like the two films I just mentioned, they brought huge losses to the film company, but the two lead actors received more than 10 million US dollars. I don't care how much other film companies offer to rope in those stars, but for Firefly and the film companies associated with Firefly, they will never think of such a good thing in the future. Peter Guber saw that Eric was unwilling to make concessions on the salary, so he had to say, in this case, Eric, about the copyright distribution agreement, I think it is necessary for Firefly and Columbia to renegotiate. You know, the copyright of Men in Black was fully owned by Columbia at the beginning. If the sequel development is blocked, it will automatically belong to Firefly after 5 years. This agreement is too unfair to Columbia. Peter Guber left Firefly Studios with satisfaction, but Eric was still thinking about Men in Black. In the original Spacetime, compared to other popular Hollywood movies, the Men in Black series was the most ill-fated. The interval between the production of the trilogy was 15 years. And whether it was the reputation or the box office, each movie was worse than the previous, but the production budget had increased exponentially. Similar to the Mission Impossible series, most of the profits from the Men in Black series were shared by Will Smith and other main creators. Relatively speaking, Sony Pictures only made a small amount of money. The reason for this situation was mainly because Sony's film business was not doing well. Among the major film companies, Sony's performance was at the bottom most years, which also caused its weak position in front of the A-list superstars. Paramount could still argue with Tom Cruise after the box office failure of Mission Impossible 3, but Sony Pictures did not have the ability to maintain a decent operation. They could only use the strategy of high pay to attract stars and projects. In the original Spacetime, Hollywood's first $20 million salary was given to Jim Carrey by Sony Columbia. Compared to Sony Columbia, Firefly did not have any concerns in this regard. If the salary for Men in Black could not be negotiated, Eric would rather put the project on hold for a long time. After all, he had a lot of projects with higher profit margins waiting to be developed, and he did not have to compromise like Sony. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but look forward to the next battle with Marvel. As long as Marvel, whose superhero copyrights were still in a state of disarray, was snatched, even if there was nothing else, Firefly could maintain its strong position in Hollywood for the next 20 years or even longer. Men in Black was the last film related to Firefly Group during the summer of 1994. After the release of this movie, more than half of the summer was over. While other major film companies were still releasing a few films one after another at the end of the summer, Firefly had already begun to count the gains of this popular summer. At the end of July, Firefly's finance department produced the preliminary financial report for the first half of 1994. Although there was a brief period of chaos caused by the ABC merger in the first half of the year, Firefly Group's revenue for the first half of the year after the merger still reached $7.3 billion. However, because of the compensation expenses caused by the restructuring of the department and the layoffs, the group's net interest rate dropped slightly to only 9%. The group had achieved a total net profit of $657 million in the first 6 months. This figure did not exceed the group's internal expectations, and was even higher than the data of most Wall Street analysts. At the same time, after intense bidding and negotiations, the famous Condé Nast Group in North America finally decided to buy the paper media assets of Firefly at a price of $1.52 billion. Stimulated by a series of good news such as the summer box office, the $8 billion bonds issued by Firefly Pictures for the acquisition of ABC were sold out on July 20th. After that, all kinds of people inside and outside Firefly who had their own plans started to become restless. First of all, with the excellent box office of $215 million in 5 weeks of The Lion King, the head of Disney's animation department, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, who had been waiting for the right time, jumped out as pawns and began to confidently fight for the interests of the Disney animation department's employees who had been oppressed for a long time. The layout of Marvel Entertainment was still in the final stage, and Ron Perlman was still hiding in the dark. In order to show his importance to Disney's animation department, Eric was very cooperative and personally came forward to discuss the conditions with Peter Schneider and Roy Disney. Eric deliberately did not mention the abolition of Disney's hand-drawn animation department, but obviously did not want to compromise quickly. He successfully conveyed some wrong signals to some people. Chapter 642. It had just entered August. While Eric was still pretending to negotiate with Peter Schneider, the topic of Firefly's closure of the hand-drawn animation department, which had cooled down after the heated discussion at the end of June, suddenly became a hot topic again. For a time, news such as Eric Williams and the senior management of Disney's animation department clashing. Disney's animation department employees are dissatisfied with the company's treatment and will leave. The Lion King will be Disney's last 2D animation, and so on appeared in the newspapers one after another. This was because the expected total profit of The Lion King was more than $1 billion. For a production cost of less than $50 million, the return on investment was an astonishing 2,000%, which far exceeded the profit margin of other live-action films released during the summer. Therefore, if Firefly was a listed company, even with the support of many blockbuster films released during the summer, the news that Disney's animation department might collapse would inevitably cause a sharp drop in their stock price. Under such a powerful media attack, soon, all the bystanders who received the relevant news through different media had the idea that Firefly was about to lose Disney's hand-drawn animation department. The organizations and media that closely followed this matter speculated that other forces other than Disney's animation department were pressuring Firefly Group in this way. In their view, in the face of the huge profits of The Lion King, Firefly would never easily give up on Disney's animation department. However, at the same time, it was impossible for Disney's animation department to have such a wide media influence. After all, Disney's Animation was a subsidiary of Firefly Group's subsidiary. Its original media resources were basically in the hands of the parent company. It was impossible for them to make such a big move alone. Moreover, compared to the media's relentless pressure, Firefly Group's response to this series of news seemed to be a little weak. Most of the analysis organizations came to the conclusion that Firefly would be forced to yield to Disney's animation department. On the second Monday of August, Ron Perlman, the chairman of Andrew Holdings, headquartered in Manhattan, New York, issued a public statement in his capacity as a creditor of Firefly Pictures, along with 27 other creditors who held long-term bonds of Firefly, expressing concern about the internal turmoil caused by a series of wrong decisions made by Firefly's board of directors and senior management. At the same time, in order to protect the interests of the creditors, Ron Perlman publicly appealed to Firefly's shareholders, hoping to enter Firefly's board of directors as a creditor and participate in Firefly's decision-making and management. If Firefly's board of directors rejected this request, Ron Perlman said that he would submit it to the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission for arbitration. Immediately afterward, Peter Schneider of Los Angeles and Roy Disney, an important member of the Disney family, almost simultaneously issued a statement on behalf of all the employees of Disney's animation department, expressing strong disappointment with Firefly's series of group decisions. At the same time, they also welcomed Firefly's creditors to participate in the group's operations and hoped that Firefly's shareholders would carefully consider this matter. In order to prevent the news from leaking in advance, Ron Perlman and his 27 joint creditors only held a total of $3.6 billion Firefly bonds, less than half of Firefly's total bonds. When Ron Perlman issued the statement, all the media and organizations that closely followed the storm in early August instantly understood the ins and outs of the matter. Ron Perlman also issued a call to Firefly's other creditors at the press conference. However, when the other creditors were still considering the pros and cons, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney's statements of support made them instantly decide to side with Ron Perlman. In the Firefly meeting, Eric looked at the latest information in front of him and said in a sarcastic tone, "They formed a creditor alliance in just 3 days. That's really fast. I'm just a little curious. How do the 77 creditors want to allocate the 2 board seats that they want?" Katzenberg looked at Buffett and the other directors in the room and said, "Eric, I think you're completely complicating this matter. We don't need to go through such a crisis. Although we're an unlisted company, if we fall out with the creditors, it will have a great negative impact on Firefly's future financing. Everyone must think the same, right?" Eric looked at the others and smiled. "Actually, I'm doing this to let others see what's about to happen as a revenge action. I want Marvel Entertainment more urgently than any of you think. Now, I don't need to hide this goal from everyone. In the future, everyone will realize that in order to get Marvel, it's definitely worth it to start this farce that won't have any substantial impact on Firefly." Although Marvel Entertainment was a listed company, it was similar to MGM's shareholding model. Most of Marvel Entertainment's shares were also controlled by Ron Perlman's Drew Holdings. If he wanted to get Marvel, it was impossible to absorb Marvel Entertainment's shares through public channels. The only way was to publicly launch an acquisition of Marvel Entertainment. If other companies did this, Ron Perlman would definitely decisively abandon this mess that was burdened with a large amount of debt and years of losses. In the original space-time, even Michael Jackson almost became a potential buyer of Marvel Entertainment. However, only Firefly could not do so because Firefly's current performance was too eye-catching. Once Firefly made a public acquisition offer, it would be the same as telling others that they had their eyes on the copyrights of certain characters in Marvel Entertainment. Come and fight with them. The result could be imagined. It was conceivable that when competitors joined in the bidding to raise the acquisition price of Marvel Entertainment, a shrewd businessman like Ron Perlman would definitely not let go of this opportunity. Once he was sure that Firefly was determined to get their hands on Marvel Entertainment, Ron Perlman would definitely take the opportunity to demand an exorbitant price. At that time, Firefly might once again welcome an individual shareholder with a sizable shareholding. Looking at the mess that Marvel Entertainment was in, such a shareholder was definitely not something that any company would want to see. Inspired by Ron Perlman's attempt to enter Firefly's board of directors as a creditor, after more than a month of secret deployment, Eric was sure that the bargaining chips in their hands were definitely enough to make Ron Perlman obediently give up Marvel Entertainment. There was no other way. Since no one has any objections, Eric finished his speech and saw that no one in the conference room said anything, so he continued, "Then let's start discussing how to end this farce." Chapter 643. Hello everyone, this is CNN Instant Entertainment News. Since the end of June, due to the success of the 2D animated film, The Lion King, Disney's animation department and its parent company, Firefly Group, have had a huge disagreement on the development strategy of animated films. Since then, the dispute has shown signs of intensifying. This Monday, the Firefly Creditors Alliance, initiated by the famous Wall Street investor Ron Perlman, suddenly put pressure on Firefly's board of directors, demanding 2 creditor director seats on the board of directors. The request of the Firefly Creditors Alliance was quickly supported by Disney's animation department. The head of Disney's animation department, Peter Schneider, said that the inclusion of creditor directors could better supervise the management and operations of Firefly Group. preventing major shareholders from acting arbitrarily and unscrupulously, harming the common interests of the minority shareholders, creditors, and tens of thousands of employees of Firefly Group. A small cocktail party was being held in a mansion in Beverly Hills. Ron Perlman, Roy Disney, and Peter Schneider attended the cocktail party with other guests. They were swirling wine glasses in their hands and watching the CNN news on the TV, which was placed in the open field, with great interest. They seemed to be waiting for something. On the TV screen, after the host summarized the news, he continued, "After The Lion King broke the box office record for American animated films last week, Firefly's spokesperson publicly announced that they would be holding a grand celebration party for The Lion King at the Sunset Tower Hotel in Hollywood today." The industry generally speculated that this party represented Firefly Group's beginning to compromise with Disney's animation department. However, this afternoon, all the employees of Disney's animation department issued a statement in the Los Angeles Evening News. In order to support Firefly's creditor alliance entering Firefly's board of directors, all the employees of Disney's animation department will refuse to participate in this party. It's currently 19:15 Western Time. For the specific situation, please look at our reporter's live report from Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. The TV screen cut to Los Angeles at dusk. The CNN reporter standing in front of the Sunset Tower Hotel with a microphone in hand said, "Hello host, hello audience. We can see that the Sunset Tower Hotel, which should be bustling with noise and excitement, is actually no different from before. 15 minutes ago, a Firefly spokesperson announced an emergency cancellation of tonight's Lion King celebration party. However, before 7 o'clock, Eric Williams, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and other senior executives of Firefly still appeared in the parking lot of the Sunset Tower Hotel one after another. We speculate that this is a last-ditch effort by the senior executives of Firefly, but obviously, this effort ended in failure. So far, we have not seen any senior executives or employees of Disney's animation department appear at the Sunset Tower Hotel. Looking at the deserted Sunset Tower Hotel on the TV screen, Peter Schneider suddenly felt a little worried about whether he had gone too far. He was not worried about offending Eric. Even if he left Firefly, he felt that he could find another company. However, the current situation did not seem to be beneficial to his own interests. Roy Disney, who noticed the change in Peter Schneider's expression, patted him on the shoulder and said, "Peter, think about how Eric Williams has treated us in the past 2 years. Moreover, as long as Ron and the others get 2 board seats, and Disney Animation continues to make profits, we don't have to worry about anything." Ron Perlman, who was still smiling like a Maitreya Buddha, also said, "Don't worry, Peter. As long as we get 2 board seats, then the number of directors who are not under Eric Williams' influence will reach as many as 5. We can also take the opportunity to cultivate our own influence within Firefly. At that time, even if Eric Williams has absolute control of Firefly, he won't dare to do anything extreme and risk upheaval in Firefly." Peter Schneider nodded in relief. Roy Disney then raised the goblet in his hand and said, "Then for our common goal, I suggest that we all raise our glasses together." Most of the people who attended this small reception were representatives of Firefly's creditors. When they heard Roy Disney's words, they were about to echo his words. However, the TV screen that was still broadcasting the news suddenly changed. On the screen, the various media reporters who were originally scattered around the Sunset Tower Hotel suddenly rushed to the entrance of the Sunset Tower Hotel, as if they had felt the pull of a magnet. Among the group of reporters, Eric's figure quickly appeared in the shaky live broadcast of CNN. On the screen, Eric was expressionlessly protected in the middle by his bodyguards. After waiting for the surrounding reporters to quiet down, Eric stared at the camera lens closely, as if he was staring at someone in front of the TV. He said in a gloomy tone, "In that case, tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning, Firefly will hold a press conference. Those who are popular and those who are not are welcome to come together." After saying this, Eric hurriedly got into his car under the protection of his bodyguards. In front of the TV, a group of people who were about to raise their glasses to celebrate looked at each other. Even the experienced Roy Disney had a bad feeling in his heart. As a member of the Disney family, which meant a lot to Disney, Roy Disney had met Eric many times. In his impression, Eric had always been far calmer than his peers. However, no matter how precocious he was, Roy Disney still had to admit that Eric was just a young man who was less than 25 years old. If Eric impulsively decided to fight to the death, he was likely to lose everything. Because of this anxiety, Roy Disney did not rest well for the rest of the night. Early the next morning, Roy Disney got up and turned on the TV. He patiently waited until 9 o'clock. CNN's news channel showed the scene of Firefly's press conference hall on time. At present, Firefly Group already holds 17% of Marvel Entertainment's debt. As an important creditor of Marvel Entertainment, we found that Marvel Entertainment's operating loss in the first half of 1994 had exceeded $24 million. Moreover, Marvel Entertainment's stock price has continued to fall. Compared to Marvel Entertainment's total debt of $553 million, Marvel Entertainment, whose stock market value is less than $300 million, has shown serious insolvency. According to federal company law, at the same time as this statement, Firefly Group will file a lawsuit in the New York District Court where Marvel Entertainment is located, requesting that Marvel Entertainment be subject to compulsory bankruptcy protection immediately. At the same time, we found that a huge amount of debt financing for the company's development was illegally embezzled by Marvel Entertainment's parent company, Andrew Holdings. This serious violation of bond trading laws directly led to Marvel Entertainment's current predicament of being on the verge of bankruptcy. Therefore, Firefly Group will file a lawsuit in accordance with the law. We are determined to make Andrew Holdings pay the price for its illegal behavior. Roy Disney patiently listened to Katzenberg's speech on the TV. After worrying all night, he suddenly relaxed. This statement did not mention Disney's animation department at all, which meant that Firefly's management did not intend to fight to the death. However, Roy Disney immediately had doubts about the purpose of this statement. He could tell that this should be Firefly's revenge for Ron Perlman's actions, but he did not understand many of the details. So he picked up the phone and dialed the number of his private lawyer. After the private lawyer's explanation, Roy Disney finally understood. According to American company law, when a company was seriously insolvent and continued to lose money, the creditors had the right to request mandatory bankruptcy protection for the company. Bankruptcy protection was different from bankruptcy liquidation. Bankruptcy protection was equivalent to the creditor giving the debtor a buffer period before bankruptcy liquidation, allowing the debtor to propose relevant plans for the company's restructuring and debt repayment within a certain period of time. However, if this plan still did not work, the company would immediately face bankruptcy liquidation. The main purpose of Firefly Group's proposed mandatory bankruptcy protection for Marvel Entertainment was similar to Ron Perlman's. It was also to obtain control of Marvel as a creditor. However, unlike Ron Perlman's method, because of Marvel's insolvency, Firefly Group's request would be supported by the federal court. Once Firefly Group seized control of Marvel, Andrew Holdings' illegal use of Marvel's debt financing would also become an important weakness for Firefly Group to attack Ron Perlman. Not only would Andrew Holdings face a refund of Marvel's financing funds, but it would also face a huge fine from the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. This was the final trump card. As a country with very strict financing regulations, illegally using hundreds of millions of dollars of financing funds would definitely face a fine of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once the crime was proven, even an industry giant with tens of billions of dollars in assets could be severely punished by the SEC. At this time, in the mansion in Beverly Hills where the party was held last night, Ron Perlman, who was still in his pajamas, no longer had his usual calm expression. Instead, the hand holding the microphone trembled with fear and anger. After Firefly Group issued this statement, several companies such as Berkshire Hathaway, State Street Global Fund, and Firefly Investment Company, respectively, issued similar statements as creditors. These companies held close to 90% of Marvel Entertainment's bonds. Once the New York District Court ruled that Firefly Group's request was reasonable, Ron Perlman knew that he would not even have room to maneuver between the other creditors. Avi, I want an explanation. Why didn't I know about this until now? Shouldn't I have been notified in advance of the transfer of 90% of the bond's ownership? Tell me why. After roaring angrily at Marvel CEO Avi Allard, Ron Perlman patiently listened to the other party's explanation and slammed the microphone on the table. Avi Allard's explanation to Ron Perlman was that Firefly and several other creditors had only recently submitted the relevant debt transfer statement to Marvel Entertainment. Marvel had also prepared the relevant documents at this time, but because Ron Perlman had come to Los Angeles, they had not been sent to him in time. Ron Perlman keenly noticed that there were two time differences in Avi Allard's words. Firefly and Berkshire Hathaway had used a reasonable time difference to inform Marvel Entertainment in writing within the legal period after the debt transfer took effect. Then Marvel Entertainment's CEO, Avi Allard, had created another time difference, further delaying the time Ron Perlman received the news. Ron Perlman found that the situation he was facing seemed to be worse than he had imagined. If he guessed correctly, Avi Allard was likely to have been roped in by Firefly. If that was the case, he was likely to suffer a big setback from Marvel Entertainment. After anxiously pacing around the bedroom a few times, Ron Perlman suddenly patted his bald head. He suddenly realized that Firefly had started to plan at least a month ago. Then he discovered two possibilities. One was that Firefly had realized that he wanted to use the Disney Animation Department incident to enter Firefly's board of directors a month ago, so they had prepared in advance to prevent him from doing so. The other possibility was that Firefly had been coveting Marvel for a long time. After issuing bonds worth more than $500 million, Marvel no longer had any value in Ron Perlman's eyes. It was just a mess that he could easily get rid of. Ron Perlman even rarely paid attention to Marvel's operations. If Firefly had the same idea, then the purpose of the other party's actions was very likely to make him retreat in the face of difficulties and stop coveting Firefly's board of directors seat. After quickly weighing the pros and cons in his mind, Ron Perlman keenly realized that the first possibility was very low. If it was only to use Marvel's weakness to force him to stop, Firefly and Berkshire Hathaway would not have needed to absorb nearly 90% of Marvel's bonds. That was $500 million in cash. In Ron Perlman's eyes, Marvel was not even worth half of $500 million. To be honest, if someone offered $500 million, Ron Perlman felt that he would immediately give Marvel to the other party. If Firefly's purpose was the second possibility, then the $500 million would immediately be explained. The question now was, why did Firefly want Marvel, and why did they make a move at such a sensitive time? Were they not afraid that something would happen to Disney's animation department? Or did they think that Marvel was more valuable than Disney's animation department? Ron Perlman's pacing became slower and slower. Soon he picked up the phone again, bypassed Avi Allard, and dialed the number of another person in charge of Marvel. Chapter 644. 5 years ago, Warner's Batman made a huge profit of no less than $1 billion in box office and peripheral sales at a cost of $35 million. After Ron Perlman confirmed his guess, he immediately thought that if Firefly coveted Marvel, their target must be the superhero movie rights in Marvel's hands that were comparable in popularity to DC's Batman, Superman, and other characters. Less than an hour after the call to Marvel's New York headquarters, Ron Perlman looked at the fax documents of several copyright transfer agreements in his hands and confirmed his guess. Although Firefly only directly held the insignificant Blade Warrior movie rights, and it was still in the hands of Firefly's New Line Cinema. However, since the second half of last year, Flower Pictures, which had broken away from Firefly Group, had successively obtained the rights to Batman, Fantastic Four, and Hulk from some small movie companies that owned the rights to Marvel's superhero movies by transferring the rights to invest in their movies. Moreover, Flower Pictures was currently competing with some other movie companies for the rights to X-Men. This deal should have ended in the first half of last year, but because of Flower Pictures' participation, Marvel had been waiting for the right price to sell it at a higher price until now. Ron Perlman once again called Marvel's CEO, Avi Allard, as the controlling shareholder, to immediately stop the licensing of all Marvel superhero characters. After that, he began to consider the next step of his plan. Firefly Group's statement in the morning did not mention Disney's animation department, and only issued a threat as a creditor of Marvel. This meant that Firefly Group had no intention of giving up on Disney's animation department. Coupled with Marvel's current situation, Ron Perlman suddenly felt that he suddenly had two important bargaining chips. These two bargaining chips could not only allow him to obtain a seat on the board of directors of Firefly Group, but could even go one step further and become a shareholder of Firefly Group. But right now, the most important thing was how to avoid the fate of bankruptcy protection that Marvel was facing. Once the New York District Court approved the bankruptcy protection request of the creditors led by Firefly Group, Marvel would face the fate of being taken over by the creditors. At that time, Marvel would be completely out of his control. As a super capitalist player, Ron Perlman could instantly think of a series of ways to prevent Marvel from going bankrupt. But at the same time, he realized that since Firefly Group had been secretly planning for so long, there was not much time left for him. He was likely to have less than 2 weeks left. Moreover, most of the ways to prevent Marvel from going bankrupt were ultimately nothing more than one word: money. But in order to enter Firefly Group's board of directors this time, Ron Perlman used all the liquidity of Andrew Holdings to buy Firefly Group's bonds. Some of them were forcibly transferred from Revlon and other holding subsidiaries. It was impossible for him to come up with enough funds for Marvel's capital operations in a short time. Now the original plan had become a kind of self-made shackle. If he wanted to get out of this predicament, he had to find a way to get enough external support. Ron Perlman found the list of the CEOs of the 7 major Hollywood film companies. After weighing for a moment, he eliminated Columbia, Fox and MGM, which had close ties with Firefly. Ron Perlman called his assistant and said, "Help me make an appointment with Universal CEO Michael Eisner, Time Warner CEO Terry Semel, and Paramount CEO Shirley Lansing, ASAP. Santa Monica Airport." Eric stood next to his car and waved at a Gulfstream business jet. He watched the Gulfstream fly all the way to the sky. In addition to Warren Buffett, Tom Murphy, and David West, the business jet also had Katzenberg and Firefly's chief legal officer, Edward Lewis. These people would be rushing to New York together and use their respective connections and influence to lobby the New York District Court to approve Marvel's bankruptcy protection application in the shortest time possible. After completely revealing his plan for revenge against Marvel, Eric believed that with Ron Perlman's shrewdness, he would definitely be able to guess Firefly's desire for Marvel. However, the bargaining chips in Firefly's hands were also far beyond Ron Perlman's expectations. In addition to Marvel's CEO, Avi Allard, being roped in by Firefly, in the process of absorbing Marvel's bonds, Firefly also collected a lot of evidence that Ron Perlman had used Marvel for illegal capital operations. Firefly even knew the amount of financing funds that Ron Perlman had embezzled from Marvel through Andrew Holdings. Marvel's current long-term bonds totaled $553 million, but only $73 million had been used for Marvel's recent development. The other $470 million had all flowed into the account of Andrew Holdings. As long as they seized control of Marvel and obtained more detailed and conclusive evidence, Ron Perlman would have to pay a price far greater than the $470 million in benefits he would receive if he wanted to get out of this crisis. Watching the Gulfstream business jet disappear into the horizon, Eric withdrew his gaze and said to his female assistant, Kelly Haynes, "Kelly, what do you think Ron Perlman will do next?" "Of course he'll protect Marvel." Kelly followed Eric into the car and continued, "The most direct way is for the major shareholders to inject capital and push up Marvel's stock price. However, Ron Perlman definitely doesn't have enough liquid capital to buy Firefly's bonds. He also doesn't have enough time to raise hundreds of millions of dollars. Since this method won't work, I think he'll definitely find a way to create a very good news to prevent Marvel from being filed for bankruptcy protection." "Good news." Eric leaned back in the leather seat and said, "Firefly wants Marvel. Is that good news?" Kelly smiled and said, "Of course it is. However, most people definitely don't think so. Now the media is in a mess with all the information surrounding Firefly's recent events. Before this matter is completely settled, it won't be easy to sort out all the ins and outs." Eric narrowed his eyes in relief and said, "The messier it is, the better it is for us. I think the following news will definitely make the situation even more chaotic. When do you plan to have a showdown with the animation department? Eric smiled confidently and said, let's wait a little longer. Since Ron Perlman needs a piece of good news like Disney Animation will definitely come in handy. Chapter 645. In an office at the headquarters of Universal Pictures, Michael Eisner put down Variety magazine, which contained Firefly's financial report for the first half of the year, and couldn't help but feel a little emotional. Although the net profit of all the businesses of Firefly Group was only about $600 million, which was less than half of the combined profits of Firefly and ABC last year, this was already beyond everyone's expectations. Under normal circumstances, in the process of merger between two large companies, it was very common for the new company's performance to decline in a short period of time due to the turbulence caused by the integration and restructuring. However, Firefly Group passed through this turbulent period very smoothly. Michael Eisner had to admit that if he were in that position, it would be difficult for him to do better. After surviving the quadruple bypass surgery without any mishap, Michael Eisner's body was not much different from before, except for the need to maintain a vegetarian diet. Moreover, with the excellent box office results of The Mummy, after his body recovered, Michael Eisner easily returned to his position as Universal CEO. However, now he had to face another difficult problem. Before his surgery, in order to appease the board of directors, he had personally pulled Michael Ovitz into Universal as the CEO. Thinking about how to squeeze Michael Ovitz, who had been trying to share his power, out of Universal, the office door knocked a few times. Michael Eisner came back to his senses. Thinking that he would need more effort to deal with this person next, Michael Eisner quickly pulled himself together. A bald fatty with a big smile walked into the office under the guidance of the secretary. Michael Eisner showed a warm expression and took the initiative to stand up and extend his hand to the other party. Mr. Perlman, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Mr. Eisner. After the secretary served 2 cups of coffee, Michael Eisner and Ron Perlman chatted casually for a while before asking the obvious. May I know why Mr. Perlman asked to meet me today? Ron Perlman took out a few copyright transfer contracts from his briefcase and handed them to Michael Eisner. He said, before we talk about this matter, I think Mr. Eisner should take a look at this first. Michael Eisner skimmed through the copies of the contracts and put them aside. He said, so Marvel wants to get Universal's help to avoid bankruptcy, right? Yes, I think we can work together, Ron Perlman said. From these copyright transfer documents, it can be seen that Firefly didn't target Marvel purely for revenge this time. They must have coveted Marvel for a long time. With Eric Williams' foresight in developing movies, this also indirectly means that the superhero copyrights under Marvel are definitely much more valuable than imagined. As long as Universal can help Marvel out of this crisis, then we can become the most solid partners. In the future, we can work together to develop these superhero projects under Marvel. Michael Eisner curled his lips without batting an eyelid. He asked, so Mr. Perlman, what does Universal need to do? Ron Perlman was stunned, but he quickly said, I only need Universal to make a gesture of buying Marvel at a high price. It's just a gesture. Universal doesn't have to pay any price at all. As long as this good news prevents Marvel from being forced into bankruptcy protection, then I will have enough time to deal with Marvel's internal affairs. Michael Eisner's sneer almost overflowed. Then, Marvel will have a deep cooperation with Universal, right? Without thinking, Ron Perlman answered firmly, of course. Michael Eisner finally didn't hide his sneer. He said bluntly, Mr. Perlman, I know Marvel's predicament very well. At the same time, I know your character very well. So we don't have to play these little tricks at all. If you want Universal's help, sure, but I need to see tangible benefits. Ron Perlman's expression became a little awkward, but he still said, Mr. Eisner, in that case, what will it take for Universal to be willing to help Marvel? As long as Marvel transfers the movie copyrights of the popular heroes to Universal, I will agree to publicly support Marvel. That's impossible. Ron Perlman subconsciously blurted out, but he soon realized that he had lost his composure. He hurriedly restrained his expression and said, "Mr. Eisner, this condition is a little too much." Marvel had already lost the copyrights of Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Hulk. Based on Firefly's attitude, Ron Perlman guessed that it would be very difficult for Marvel to recover the copyrights of these three superheroes. If the copyrights of the remaining popular superheroes were transferred to Universal, Ron Perlman couldn't imagine what value Marvel would have left. Although Marvel always claimed to have thousands of superheroes under its banner, in fact, this calculation took into account all the characters that appeared in Marvel's comics system. There was a lot of exaggeration. In Marvel Comics, there were only a few dozen superheroes that the public was familiar with, and there were no more than 10 superheroes that were as popular as DC's Batman and Superman. Although Ron Perlman realized that Firefly coveted Marvel, he still felt that what Firefly really wanted was the superheroes under Marvel that had the same potential for movie adaptations as Batman and Superman, not the entire Marvel. Once he satisfied Michael Eisner's request and accidentally transferred the copyrights of the superheroes that Firefly valued to Universal, he would completely lose this bargaining chip. Michael Eisner's thoughts were actually the same as Ron Perlman's. He also didn't think that the entire Marvel was a treasure trove with great potential for movie adaptations. Therefore, from the beginning, Michael Eisner didn't have much desire to get involved in this mess. Although he really wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to obtain the copyrights of several popular Marvel heroes, Firefly had already shown such an aggressive attitude, and Ron Perlman was as shrewd as a fox. It was almost impossible for Universal to profit from this. What's more, Universal was currently negotiating with Nicole Kidman about the sequel to The Mummy. If he angered Firefly because of his involvement in this matter, Michael Eisner was worried that Eric would ask Nicole Kidman to withdraw from the Mummy series. If he messed up this lucrative project because of a target that he didn't see any prospects for, it would be a loss that outweighed the gains. Chapter 646. After returning from Worldwide without any success, Ron Perlman was once again rejected by Warner. This was because Terry Semel, the CEO of Warner, was already in trouble and had no time to deal with Ron Perlman. With the continuous box office explosion of many big-budget movies, the total box office of the North American summer of 1994 was expected to exceed the $2 billion mark for the first time. In addition to the extremely dazzling Firefly pictures, Universal, Paramount, and even MGM, which had been silent for many years, had a good harvest during this summer. Only Warner Brothers, which was firmly in the top position of market share a few years ago, had a bleak performance. On May 20th, the opening Western film of the summer, Mahuali the Gambler, had a good reputation, but because of the strong pressure from blockbusters such as The Mummy, Saving Private Ryan, and True Lies, the original $100 million box office estimate ended up with less than $60 million. Another Western film, The Law Enforcement General, which cost a lot of money, ended with a total box office of $25 million. Although the box office of The Ultimate Witness, released at the end of July, was expected to exceed $100 million, but during the entire summer, Time Warner's cumulative box office was less than $200 million. Their market share would fall below 10% for the first time, and even the first time in the past 5 years that the summer market share fell below 20%. In the face of such a serious decline in performance, Terry Semel, who had just sat on the CEO throne of Time Warner, instantly faced the joint criticism from shareholders and the board of directors. The competitors who lost the CEO position of Time Warner also began to stir. In this case, although Time Warner had enough strength to take Marvel from Firefly, Terry Semel, who had become very cautious in order to keep his position, did not dare to get involved in Marvel, a mess that required hundreds of millions of dollars of real money to solve. After that, Ron Perlman's request for a meeting with Paramount CEO, Shirley Lansing, didn't receive any response. 3 days passed quickly. Just as Ron Perlman was anxiously considering whether to return to his base in New York to seek support, or to test whether the major film companies that had close ties with Firefly were interested in cooperating, a personal call from Viacom's CEO, Sam Sherdong, gave Ron Perlman hope once again. Paramount headquarters on Melrose Avenue in Hollywood. Ron Perlman met Sam Sherdong and the CEO of Paramount, Shirley Lansing, at the same time in an office. After exchanging pleasantries, they sat down on the sofa in the reception area. Before Ron Perlman could give his prepared speech, Sam Sherdong said bluntly, "Ron, I've already learned about the recent events in detail. You wish to obtain the position of Firefly's director as a creditor, but you're in trouble because of Marvel's debt. Paramount can help you solve this problem. Everyone gets what they need. What do you think?" Ron Perlman, who had been a little smug, suddenly had a bad feeling. After Firefly expressed interest in Marvel, Ron Perlman had changed his original plan. He wanted to use the two chips of the creditors and all of Marvel to become both a director and a shareholder of Firefly Group. But now, these powerful potential partners seemed to only be willing to give him one choice. Sure enough, Sam Sherdong did not wait for Ron Perlman to answer. He said again, "Paramount can buy Marvel and bear all of Marvel's debts. Then, you can fight for what you want without any burden. What do you think?" After running into a wall twice in a row, Ron Perlman gradually came to realize some of the facts. Since Ron Perlman was able to make a billion-dollar fortune from scratch on Wall Street, he certainly did not lack the decisiveness of a successful person. After quickly weighing the pros and cons, Ron Perlman realized that by giving up the burden of Marvel, Firefly would no longer have a bargaining chip to threaten him. With the support of Firefly's creditor alliance and Disney's animation department, he still had a high chance of obtaining the position of Firefly's director. The position of the director of the #1 media company in North America and even the world. Or the position of a major shareholder of a comic company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Almost any fool could tell which to choose. Ron Perlman quickly made a decision. He said, "Mr. Sherdong, how much does Perm intend to offer?" Sam Sherdong said, $100 million. When Ron Perlman heard this price, he almost jumped up. $100 million? Are you kidding me? 6 years ago, when Ron Perlman bought Marvel, he spent $80 million. A few years ago, in order to give investors the illusion that Marvel was rapidly expanding so that they could issue bonds, Marvel had bought a few animation and toy companies. All these expenses added up to more than $100 million. Although Marvel was now facing the dilemma of a falling stock price and a debt crisis, its actual net worth was still more than $100 million. Sam Sherdong's offer was no different from robbery. Forcefully suppressing the urge to slam the door and leave, Ron Perlman said with a trembling voice, "Mr. Sherdong, don't you think this price is too insincere?" Sherdong didn't seem to notice the change in Ron Perlman's expression. His attitude was still strong as he said, "This price is very reasonable. Although Marvel's current market value is indeed higher than this, after Viacom buys Marvel, if Marvel doesn't show its true value, Viacom will have to take on an additional debt of more than $500 million. This is a very risky deal." Ron Perlman retorted, "Eric Williams has already spent nearly $500 million in cash to buy Marvel. Isn't this enough to show Marvel's value?" Sherdong sneered, "I only know that once Firefly controls Marvel, then you will have to obediently spit out the debt financing you swallowed from Marvel. At the same time, you will also face an investigation by the SEC, Federal Securities and Exchange Commission. Sell Marvel to Viacom, and I can promise not to pursue this matter." Ron Perlman fell silent. This was what he was most worried about. The SEC had the same bad habit as the IRS. Once they found a problem with a company's transaction, they would investigate all similar transactions in the past. Since Drew Holdings was able to use Marvel to get hundreds of millions of dollars, it was easy to imagine the inside story of the past transactions. After all, if he didn't use these shady methods, Ron Perlman wouldn't have been able to get his current wealth. A few minutes later, Ron Perlman said, "I need to think about it." Sherdong nodded and said, "Of course, no problem. Viacom is patient enough. However, your opponents are big companies like Firefly, Berkshire Hathaway, and State Street Global Fund. They won't give you too much time." Ron Perlman replied coldly, "I don't need Mr. Sherdong to remind me of this." After leaving Paramount's office building, Ron Perlman stood in the bright sunshine of Los Angeles in August. He felt a slight chill all over his body. He suddenly missed Wall Street in the 1980s. Back then, Daekhong Securities was still at its peak. Malicious mergers and acquisitions were in full swing. He could get endless funds to attack cities by issuing junk bonds. However, all of this disappeared with a stock market crash at the end of the 1980s. Daekhong Securities collapsed, the junk bond market shrank, and his rapidly expanding business came to an abrupt end. Back then, even the heads of the mega corporations had to be careful when they heard his name. Now he had to be ignored or mocked by these despicable local tyrants of Hollywood. Recalling the golden age of the past, Ron Perlman quickly decided to return to New York, to Wall Street. Perhaps Wall Street was greedier than these local tyrants of Hollywood, but at least it was his territory, his stage. He could use the rules more skillfully. In Paramount's office building, Shirley Lansing stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the office and watched Ron Perlman leave in a hurry. She could not help but ask Lei Sherdong, who was beside her, "Do you think he will sell Marvel to us?" Lei Sherdong looked at the luxury car downstairs and said, "It's hard to say. However, if we can get it, it will play a very important role in the next step of Viacom's development." Shirley Lansing nodded in agreement. Viacom's internal department had held a special meeting regarding Marvel's matter. Marvel's current structure was like a mini Disney. Although it was very pocket-sized, the system included various departments such as film, television, music, comics, and toy peripherals that a comprehensive entertainment company needed. Of course, Viacom was not interested in the film and television departments of Marvel Entertainment. They still needed the superhero copyrights in Marvel's hands, but at the same time, they also needed the toy company in Marvel's hands. Firefly's Disney peripherals brought in hundreds of millions of dollars of stable profits every year. Almost any film company in Hollywood was very envious. The other major film companies had never stopped trying to enter this business, and Viacom was no exception. Since acquiring the Blockbuster video store chain, the senior executives of Viacom had proposed the idea of using Blockbuster's retail distribution system to develop Paramount Pictures movie peripherals. However, Viacom found that Paramount did not have many high-quality movies that could be used to develop their peripherals. For example, Jurassic Park and Toy Story, which had made Firefly a lot of money in recent years, did not have a single one of these movies that could be developed with rich peripherals. Therefore, when a series of topics around Firefly recently brought Marvel Entertainment into the sights of Hollywood, the senior executives of Viacom immediately discovered Marvel's potential. Marvel's popular comic characters and toy companies could provide rich content for Viacom's peripheral plans. Moreover, if they could use Marvel's superheroes to develop a few movie series comparable to Warner's Batman, then Viacom could easily open up the entire industry chain from movies to toys. Lei Sherdong stood silently for a while before suddenly asking, "Shirley, have you seen what that little guy has been doing recently?" Shirley Lansing shook her head. "If it were me, I would definitely find a way to stabilize Disney's animation department, and then deal with the pressure from creditors. Firefly has just merged with ABC, and can still maintain a net profit of US $657 million for the first half of the year. Next, most of the summer, autumn TV series, and New Year movies are all concentrated in the second half of the year. What's more, the popular summer movies will bring explosive revenue in the videotape and peripheral markets at the end of the year. Firefly's profits will be even more generous in the second half of the year. With this kind of confidence, as long as Firefly stabilizes Disney's animation department, they don't have to worry about the pressure from creditors at all." But Eric Williams didn't do this at all. "It feels like," Lei Sherdong continued Shirley Lansing's words and said, "like he doesn't care about Disney's animation department at all, right?" Shirley Lansing nodded. Although we all know that Firefly's original plan is to shift Disney's animation to 3D animation production, after The Lion King, I believe that anyone with a little bit of rationality will not continue to adhere to the original strategy. Lei Sherdong said, "If that little guy really doesn't care, then we can take over Disney's animation department. I've already asked Peter to try this, and I'm sure that several other companies have also tried to poach people," Shirley Lansing replied. "But those people in Disney's animation department don't seem to have any intention of jumping ship. Obviously, Disney's platform is more suitable for them. And now, that little guy suddenly pointed his spear at Marvel. Lei Sherdong narrowed his eyes and suddenly had an idea in his mind. Surely, why don't we make the boldest assumption? Shirley Lansing looked at the old man next to her in confusion. Lei Sherdong hesitated for a moment and continued. Suppose that little guy still doesn't care about Disney's animation department. What do you think he will do next? This assumption is very unreasonable. No one in Hollywood would not care about an animation department that can produce $1 billion in profits. Shirley Lansing subconsciously retorted, but then she said, if this is really the case, Firefly is likely to give up on the transformation of Disney's animation department and directly cut off the entire department. Lei Sherdong's narrowed eyes suddenly opened. He said, Shirley, contact the group's finance department immediately. I want to know how much cash Viacom has available now. Shirley Lansing instantly understood Lei Sherdong's intention. If the very unreasonable assumption just now was true, no matter what reason Firefly had for cutting off Disney's animation department, Viacom would have enough reason to win it over at all costs. A mature animation department would definitely be far more useful to Viacom's peripheral plans than Marvel, which had yet to show any potential. Chapter 647. The evening at the Pointy Corner Manor always allowed Eric to temporarily escape from the hustle and bustle of Hollywood. As long as he had time, Eric would sit by the glass wall of Freedom City at sunset. Sometimes, a book or a document would appear in his hand. Then he would quietly watch the orange sunset slowly sink into the horizon until the evening lights were lit. Elizabeth once commented that Eric in such a scene was like an evil villain hiding in a corner in a movie. Chris, who had studied a little psychology, said that Eric lacked a sense of security, because he was not sitting on the villa's seaside terrace with a wider view. Instead, he was separated by a thick glass wall, as if he was isolating the whole world from himself, as if he was afraid of being disturbed or hurt. Of course, Elizabeth's statement was just a joke. Chris's theory was completely irrelevant because other than Eric himself, no one could analyze the psychological activities of a transmigrator. Only Eric himself knew that this was a habit that he had developed unknowingly. Just like how everyone had their own unique habits, Eric thought to himself. Once again, Eric put down the proposal in his hand. He raised his head and looked at the sunset that was mostly submerged by the sea. Once again, he sorted out tomorrow's matters in his mind to make sure that he did not miss any details. As the headquarters of Hollywood, Ron Perlman's recent actions did not escape Firefly's eyes. Even Ron Perlman's contact with global studios and other film companies was within Firefly's expectations. After all, Marvel was an entertainment company. There were not many companies outside of Hollywood that were interested in Marvel. Marvel had now lost the potential for capital operations. Firefly and other companies had controlled 90% of Marvel's debt, and Wall Street would not rashly provoke this hot potato. Therefore, the only ones that could compete with Firefly were the major Hollywood film companies. Although it could be seen from Ron Perlman's hasty return to New York that he hadn't reached an agreement with any of the companies, Worldwide, Warner, or Paramount, Eric still didn't want any accidents to happen. If Ron Perlman was forced into a corner, it was inevitable that he wouldn't accept the harsh conditions offered by the other companies. Therefore, Eric planned to use an even fresher cabbage to attract the attention of the major Hollywood film companies. Eric tidied up the documents and placed them on the round table beside him. Just as he was about to get up and eat dinner, he heard footsteps behind him. Then Drew, who was wearing a singlet and hot pants, jumped into Eric's arms from behind, shaking his two white legs. Eric smiled and pressed down on the girl who was rubbing against him. He asked, "Didn't you say that you were going to stay on the set of Night at the Museum for a few days? Why did you come back early?" The little girl giggled as she rested her head on Eric's lap and said, "I was afraid that you would leave me behind and drive 10880 back to Pandora in advance, so I hurried back." Eric reached out and pinched the girl's face. He turned his head and greeted the twins who were each pulling a large suitcase. This action obviously displeased the girl in his arms. She tugged at Eric's shirt and asked coquettishly, "Eric, why are you home alone?" Eric turned his head and grabbed the restless little hand. I was going to spend the night with a girl named Cyrus tonight, but you ruined it. Cyrus? The girl was stunned, but she soon understood what Eric meant by silence. She giggled and hugged Eric's neck. Now that we have little Drew, we don't need Cyrus anymore. If Drew is not enough, we still have Natasha and... Natasha. By the way, I brought you a gift. Seeing the girl excitedly open her suitcase and take out a sky-blue tentacle that had been in the limelight in Men in Black, Eric shook his head and said with a smile, "You're too insincere. Did you pass by a Disney store on your way back and buy it at the last minute?" "Of course not." The girl leaned over and forced the sky-blue antenna on Eric's head. She retorted, "I bought it at the Disney store in New York." "Well, at least it was not at the Disney store in Malibu," Eric complained in his heart. He watched as the girl took out another pink antenna and put it on his head. Then she excitedly came over and asked the twins to take pictures of them with their cameras. After patiently letting the girl do as she pleased, Eric took off the pair of weird antennae on his head and threw them aside. He asked, "You stayed in New York for so long. Did you go to Long Island to see Kevin and Xiaxia?" "Yes, I read bedtime stories to Xiaxia for several days." Eric laughed and said, "It must be another horror novel, right? Don't scare her all the time." "Of course not," Drew said with a grin. He ordered the twins to take his luggage to his bedroom. His eyes wandered for a while before he noticed a few records on the round table. He curiously picked one up and asked, "What's this?" Eric looked at the record in the girl's hand and pointed at the record player not far away. He said, "I prepared the background music for the Victoria's Secret show. Try it. You'll definitely like this song." Drew put the record into the machine. Before he walked over to Eric, a high-pitched female voice came out after a short prelude. "Oh, you broke my heart." It was only the first line, but the whole song's fierce momentum was faintly displayed. "Wow, I like this song," said the little girl who ran over to Eric. After the song with the rebellious lyrics finished playing, the little girl giggled again. "Eric, don't tell me this song was written by one of your ex-girlfriends?" Of course, Eric's only ex-girlfriend was Jennifer Aniston. Thinking about the girl he hadn't seen for a long time, Eric couldn't help but sigh in his heart. A few years had passed, and the distance between them was getting farther and farther. Maybe they couldn't go back to the past. The girl must have realized this, so she didn't hesitate to mention Jennifer Aniston in front of him. Eric knocked on the girl's head and said, "I wrote it myself, can't I?" The girl laughed a few times and cleverly didn't continue the topic. She asked, "What's the name of the song?" "Take a guess." The girl tilted her head and remembered the two letters in the lyrics. She asked tentatively, "Foo?" Eric nodded and said, "Smart, but unfortunately, there's no reward." The girl immediately moved her face closer and said, "No, I want a reward, I want a reward." Eric kissed the white and tender baby face and said, "Okay, just once is enough, don't be too greedy." "Then can you give me this record?" Eric shook his head and said, "This is just a sample, and I don't think this singer's explosive power is enough. I'll give it to you when a better singer records it. But this song is still a secret, don't spread it around." "Okay." The girl nodded and looked at the remaining records on the table. She said, "These two let me listen. I haven't eaten dinner yet, help me prepare something to eat. You only know how to play, you don't know how to stay at home at all. Haha." After The Lion King, all the employees at the Disney Animation Studio headquarters in Burbank were full of excitement that lasted for a long time. The director of The Lion King, Roger Ailes, was even more so. Although all the projects in the animation department were suspended because of the original restructuring strategy, Roger Ailes, like many people, still came to his office early. After enjoying a cup of coffee, Roger Ailes was about to ask his assistant to find the materials of several hand-drawn animation projects that were in the incubation period in the department. He wanted to study which animation would be produced after reaching an agreement with the headquarters. However, he saw one of his employees barge in without knocking on the door. Roger Ailes frowned and asked with dissatisfaction, "Jim, what happened to make you lose your composure?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Ailes, but I seem to have seen the boss in the parking lot." "Boss?" Roger Ailes repeated and stood up abruptly. "You mean Eric Williams?" Jim nodded. Yes, it seems that Mr. Michael Lynn is also there. Roger Ailes frowned and quickly felt that Eric might want to bypass Peter Schneider and Roy Disney and negotiate with them directly. However, in the previous secret meetings, the entire Disney animation department had reached an agreement to attack and defend. Roger Ailes was also very clear that only when everyone was united could they get more benefits from the parent company, so he quickly asked Jim, "Did Mr. Schneider and Mr. Disney come today?" Jim shook his head and said, "I don't know, I just arrived. After seeing the boss, I immediately came to tell you this." Roger Ailes nodded but then said, "Go and see if Peter and Roy have arrived. If they haven't arrived, call them immediately." After explaining this matter, Roger Ailes hurriedly left the office. At this time, the entire Disney animation department had already known the news of Eric's personal arrival. Many people stood up from the open-work cubicles and looked at the entrance. After hearing the news, several middle-level managers of the animation department also came out to welcome them. Peter Schneider and Roy Disney obviously didn't come to work. Eric and Michael Lynn walked in with a few attendants and saw Roger Ailes, who was pushed out to greet them. After shaking hands with him, Eric asked casually, "Where are Peter and Roy?" "Mr. Williams, they're on their way. They might be stuck in a traffic jam. They'll be here soon." Eric didn't expose Roger Ailes' lie and said, "Then let's go to the conference room first and call the heads of the other departments. If they're stuck in a traffic jam, call them." An hour later, Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, who were worried that Eric would bypass them and take the opportunity to negotiate with the employees, hurried over from home. When they appeared in the conference room of the animation department, they were sweating profusely. Eric, who was sitting leisurely at the head of the table, saw that most of the staff had arrived. He put down the Los Angeles Times in his hand and took the prepared documents from Kelly. He said to everyone, "Since everyone is here, let's start this meeting." Roy Disney spoke first. "Mr. Williams, I don't think this meeting is necessary at all. We've already stated our conditions. I think those are what everyone in the animation department should get. If the parent company can't meet them, the entire animation department, more than 700 employees, will fight to the end. Your conditions, those promotions and salary increases, or the introduction of a board of directors with creditors?" Eric looked at Roy Disney mockingly. "If it's the former, of course, it's very reasonable. But if it's the latter, do you know the consequences of introducing someone like Ron Pullman to the company's board of directors?" Eric's gradually increasing tone made the hearts of all the animation department managers in the conference room sink. At the same time, they had a bad feeling. Without waiting for Roy Disney to answer, Eric immediately said, "You must know, because whether it's Revlon or Marvel's mistakes, they're all clearly there. In the 1980s, Ron Pullman maliciously acquired Revlon. After he got his hands on it, he immediately dismantled this thriving cosmetics company. In the end, this company, which had the potential to catch up with Estée Lauder, a world-class cosmetics company, is still the same as it was 10 years ago." How many people can still remember Revlon now? Look at Marvel. After Ron Pullman took over, the comic company, which used to be far more powerful than DC, was completely reduced to a capital operation tool. 2 years ago, the 7 chief writers of Marvel were dissatisfied with Ron Pullman's misdeeds and collectively left. Now Marvel is only left with a mess of $553 million in debt. However, you want to bring a guy who only knows how to gnaw on the company's flesh and blood like a termite into the Firefly board of directors. Other than satisfying some people's selfish desires, I can't think of any other purpose. Eric's tone became angrier and angrier. He even unconsciously raised the coffee cup next to him and almost threw it out subconsciously. He inadvertently glanced at a female employee sitting at the end of the conference table. She closed her eyes in horror and wanted to hide but didn't dare to. He immediately restrained himself and put the cup back on the table. After calming down, Eric flipped open the documents in front of him and said, "Now that things have come to this, let's part on good terms. Now let's discuss the matter of changing the animation department's boss." Although Eric's words just now made the animation department managers in the conference room feel a little guilty, when they heard Eric's last sentence, they still subconsciously wondered if they had heard wrong. More than 10 animation department managers, including Peter Schneider and Roy Disney, looked at each other and realized that they didn't hear wrong. Eric really did say something. However, the same thought appeared in everyone's mind. How is this possible? *PS. There's one more chapter later. Star. Chapter 648. Amidst the silence, the director of The Lion King, Roger Ailes, was still unwilling to give up and asked, "Mr. Williams, did you really say that you want to change the boss of Disney's animation department?" "Not Disney's animation department." Eric emphasized the word Disney and said, "To be more precise, I plan to sell the entire hand-drawn animation department. The Disney brand belongs to Firefly. No one can take it away." Amidst the silence again, Peter Schneider suddenly felt a strong sense of crisis. If Eric didn't even care about Disney's animation department, then what was the point of what he and Roy Disney had done before? More importantly, if they lost Disney's animation department, the two of them, the worry in his heart gradually turned into fear. Peter Schneider suddenly stood up from his seat, pointed at Eric and shouted, "No, you won't, Eric Williams. You will never sell Disney's animation department. You're just trying to force us to give in. We will never give in, never." Eric looked at the hysterical Peter Schneider expressionlessly and said to the female assistant beside him, "Kelly, go and call security." Kelly glanced at Peter Schneider, got up, and walked out of the meeting room. After Kelly left, Eric said to Peter Schneider, "Either sit down and continue this meeting, or get out, or I'll get security to throw you out." Peter Schneider's expression was extremely ugly. He gritted his teeth, and after a few seconds of stalemate he sat down dejectedly. Compared to Peter Schneider's loss of composure, Roy Disney was even more shocked. However, Roy Disney, who thought that he was used to storms, knew that he had to be calm at times like this. He also felt that Eric might just be bluffing to force the animation department to give in. After thinking for a while, Roy Disney asked, "Mr. Williams, do you think Disney can still be considered Disney without its animation department?" Eric suddenly sighed. After such a long time, these people still couldn't figure out what he was thinking. Disney will always have an animation department. It's just that they won't use hand-drawn animation to produce animated movies anymore. Moreover, Disney will keep several animation studios in Canada, Australia, and other countries and continue to provide animation for the Disney Channel. However, Disney's animated movies will be fully converted to 3D digital production. When Roy Disney heard Eric's plan in a calm tone, his heart skipped a beat. On the surface, he still calmed down and motioned to more than a dozen people in the meeting room. He said, "So you're planning to package and sell all of us, more than 700 people in the hand-drawn animation department. Hee, even if you don't plan to keep the department, do you think we'll be willing to let you sell us off as a bargaining chip?" Roy Disney's words immediately gave the depressed people a shot in the arm. All the management of the animation department looked at Eric with bright eyes. It was as if Eric said anything inappropriate, they would immediately resign and turn the animation department into a worthless empty shell. There was a big difference between hand-drawn animation and computer animation. The production of computer animation not only required skilled digital animators, but also a large number of technical patents, tools, software, and technical support departments. Therefore, it was not so easy for a digital animator to change jobs. But at the end of the day, hand-drawn animation was an industry that did not require too much skill. An animator could participate in the production of hand-drawn animation after a few years of training. Moreover, even if they left their original company, hand-drawn animators could continue their career without any obstacles. Eric certainly knew this. Looking at more than a dozen pairs of eyes staring at him, Eric smiled, rubbed the folder on the table, and said, "Everyone, there's no need to test each other anymore. The decision to abolish Disney's hand-drawn animation department has been approved by the 3 directors of Firefly, Warren Buffett, Tom Murphy and David West, so there will be no more surprises in this decision." There was a commotion in the meeting room again, but in the end, no one was so angry that they slammed the door and left. Even Peter Schneider, who was just furious, just glared at Eric. Eric patiently waited for the crowd to quiet down again, and then continued, Then let's talk about the disadvantages of your resignation first. You can all leave and turn the animation department into a worthless empty shell. This won't cause any damage to Firefly at all. But then let's make the most perfect assumption. You found a new employer who completely agrees to the generous conditions you propose to Firefly, such as an average monthly salary of more than $10,000, a brand new workplace, and so on. Then this negotiation will take at least half a year. After half a year, you'll still have to start from scratch. You'll have to set up a new animation department, start making development plans, and look for suitable animation projects. This will take another half a year. Then, you'll have to start planning for the animation project. Everyone knows how long this will take, and it's very uncertain. Maybe it will take 2 years from the time you leave to the time when the first animation starts production. And the production will take at least 2 years. Then, your new animation department will probably take 4 years to produce the first animated movie. Don't doubt it. If you have good memories, you should clearly remember how long it took from Michael Eisner's decision to revitalize the animation department to the release of The Little Mermaid. 5 years, and I've even shortened the time by 1 year. So according to the salary conditions you've proposed, the entire animation department will need to spend at least $100 million every year to maintain its operations. That's $400 million in 4 years, which is enough to produce 5 blockbuster films. At that time, if the animated movie you produce is not as amazing as The Lion King, think about how the new employer will feel after patiently waiting for 4 years and investing a large sum of money. You should all know that The Lion King is an accident. The average standard of Disney's animation department should be films like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. So there's a 90% chance that they'll be very, very disappointed. Then they'll reduce the expenditure of the animation department. With the budget reduced, the quality of the animated movie will be affected, and then it'll be a common vicious cycle. After saying this, Eric paused for a moment, as if waiting for the reaction of the people in the conference room who had lost their arrogance. However, Eric was very sure that they would not have any reaction because what he had just said was the truth. In the original space-time, after Katzenberg left Disney and set up his own company, he poached a group of people from Disney Animation to establish DreamWorks Animation. From the establishment of DreamWorks Animation to the release of The Prince of Egypt, it took exactly 4 years, and the box office of The Prince of Egypt was lukewarm. DreamWorks Animation's second animated movie, Shrek, was released a full 3 years later. If it wasn't for Shrek's box office explosion, DreamWorks Animation, which had only produced 2 animated movies in 7 years, would have to close down and disband. After waiting for a while, Eric gently clapped his hands and said, "Sorry, forgive me for acting like a talkative villain just now. Oh no, my role today seems to be a talkative villain. However, I have to add that if you jump ship, you'll be violating the labor contract. The year-end bonus that should be due to the box office success of The Lion King will be gone. This year-end bonus should be equivalent to more than half a year's salary for most people." Sitting next to Eric, Roger Ailes asked in a dry voice, "Mr. Williams, may we know why you insist on canceling 2D animation production? It's just like how the steam textile machine replaced the manual textile machine, and the electric textile machine replaced the steam textile machine. This is the inevitable trend of technological development. 3D animation movies have too many advantages. Of course, this point can only be proven with time. If you find out that I'm wrong in a few years, then you can laugh at me as much as you want. But for now, I stand by my judgment. I've given everyone enough time to change. But recent events have made me realize that it's better for everyone to go their own way." Roger Ailes glanced at the silent Roy Disney and Peter Schneider. He sighed and didn't say anything else. Of course, Eric would not take out the detailed information for these people to see. Seeing that no one asked anything, he continued, "Now let's talk about the benefits of selling the animation department. First of all, even if you leave, your share of the profits of The Lion King will still be in your hands. Second, you can negotiate with the new owners. I believe that the treatment you'll get will be much better than negotiating separately. Also, you can take away a few 2D animation projects that the animation department has already prepared and are ready to enter production. Let me take a look. Oh, Stranger in the Wind, Mulan, and Mount Tai. These are all great ideas. Moreover, you can also take away the rights to the sequels of the 2D animated films such as The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin. These will greatly reduce the time it takes for you to produce results. Under the surprised gaze, Roger Ailes asked in an incredulous tone, Mr. Williams, are you sure you're not joking? If Eric's resolute decision to sell Disney's animation department had already made everyone feel that he was abnormal, asking them to leave with the copyright of The Lion King immediately made everyone feel that he had gone completely crazy. Of course, Eric wasn't crazy. Instead, he calmly explained, Of course, I'm not joking. However, what you can take away is the very simple production rights of the sequels to The Lion King. Your new employer only has the right to use these rights to produce sequels and make profits through the distribution of the movies. The cartoon image of The Lion King and other movies, as well as the rights to develop the periphery, still belong to Firefly. Although the global box office of The Lion King in the original space-time exceeded $900 million, the sequels were still released on video. However, Eric believed that if he could get the rights to the sequel, even if he did not have the rights to develop the peripherals, other film companies would definitely not hesitate to develop the sequel under the stimulation of the $900 million box office of The Lion King. At that time, Firefly could still use the influence of these sequels to sell peripheral films. With the current trend of The Lion King's global box office explosion, Roger Ailes could also understand the harsh and tempting conditions of Eric's conditions. At the same time, he began to involuntarily think about the plot of The Lion King's sequels. Then one last point. After the animation department is packaged and sold successfully, you will receive 5% of the total transaction amount as a reward. There is no precedent for this. Consider it a compensation that Firefly is willing to use as a bargaining chip for this transaction. If Eric had proposed this condition first, it would have caused a strong reaction. However, there was not much resistance now. Peter Schneider, who had been silent for a long time, said, Mr. Williams, a 5% bonus is too little. The average annual salary of the employees in the animation department is about $50,000. If the animation department is sold for $1 billion this time, you will receive an average compensation of $70,000, which is equivalent to 16 months of salary, including the bonus of The Lion King. Everyone will receive an average of 2 years of salary. After Eric finished his explanation, he looked at Peter Schneider with a sneer and said, Mr. Schneider, you and Mr. Roy Disney are not on the list of rewards. This is also the last decision I want to announce in this meeting. From now on, you are fired. After the meeting that day, the news that Firefly Group would package and sell the hand-drawn animation department quickly spread throughout Hollywood. And the next day, it was officially confirmed in the Los Angeles Times that Firefly would hold a public auction in a month's time. Immediately after, Firefly responded with an unprecedentedly tough stance to the request of Firefly's creditor Alliance to join the group's board of directors. After continuously releasing Firefly Group's financial report for the first half of 1994, the profit forecast for the second half of the year, and the huge deal with Condé Nast for $1.52 billion in paper assets, Firefly Group's spokesperson publicly stated that, including the funds brought in by the upcoming sale of the hand-drawn animation department, Firefly Group's expected non-operating free cash flow at the end of 1994 would be no less than $3 billion. This was enough to show Firefly Group's excellent operating and financial status. Firefly Group would regularly disclose relevant operating and financial information to creditors, but did not require creditors' directors to participate in the company's management. If creditors were still worried about the safety of the investment, Firefly Group was very willing to initiate bond repurchase measures in advance. Chapter 649. Most of the people who bought Firefly's long-term bonds were investment institutions, such as pension funds and insurance companies in North America and Europe. The biggest characteristic of these investment institutions was the pursuit of the maximum safety of funds, so they were often the main investors in United States Treasury bonds with annual interest rates below 3%. Although the rating agency gave Firefly's long-term bonds a 2A rating, which was slightly lower than the 3A safety rating of United States Treasury bonds, after Firefly released a series of financial data, especially with the stimulation of the upcoming $3 billion of free cash flow. Although the rating agency did not raise the rating of Firefly's bonds, a large number of industry analysts publicly said that Firefly's bond investment was almost as safe as United States Treasury bonds, and Firefly's long-term bonds had almost twice the yield of United States Treasury bonds, an annual interest rate of 5%. In this case, even if Firefly did not suddenly give up the hand-drawn animation department and make the creditor alliance lose their bargaining chip, the investment institutions holding Firefly's long-term bonds would not ask Firefly to start the bond repurchase in advance after Firefly's tough statement. This was tantamount to cutting off their own source of income. Therefore, when the news that Firefly was about to sell the animation department caused an uproar in Hollywood and Wall Street, the group of creditor representatives gathered in Los Angeles became the most embarrassed group. As the advocate of the creditor alliance, Ron Perlman immediately focused all his energy on Marvel after returning to New York. Although he could skillfully call the shots in the capital market, in the face of absolute power, Ron Perlman immediately became overwhelmed. Warren Buffett, Tom Murphy, and David West all had extensive connections and influence in New York. As for Katzenberg, a native of Manhattan, he became a member of the campaign team of the then New York mayoral candidate John Lindsay at the age of 19. A few years later, he helped John Lindsay run for president as a financial director. Although he did not succeed, this kind of official resume was difficult for many ordinary people to achieve in their lifetime. Even though he developed in the media industry for many years, Katzenberg was still considered a local in New York. Coupled with the title of the next CEO of the largest media group in the United States, his influence was imaginable. Under the strong push of various forces, the New York District Court was extraordinarily efficient. Ron Perlman, who returned to New York, did not even have time to do anything before he had to face various investigations from law enforcement agencies. When the news of Firefly's decision to sell the animation department reached New York, Ron Perlman, who had a premonition, immediately called Sam Redstone and wanted to agree to Viacom's conditions. Ron Perlman sensitively realized that if he agreed to Viacom's conditions, not only could he immediately get out of the whirlpool that was Marvel, but he could also get $100 million. On the other hand, if he could not make this deal, he would have to deal with Firefly. Viacom was far more eager to get this cabbage than the other major companies. At this time, Sam Redstone was not going to offend Eric Marvel. At this time, Redstone was Redstone would as Viacom's. At this time, Redstone was even more as Viacom read as Red say, Redstone's was even more as Viacom. Red. As Viacom Red. Redstone Viacom Reds as Viacom as Vi's, Viacom Red. Redstone was Red. Viacom's vis of this was of course, Redstone as Red. Therefore, Ron Perlman called Lei Sherdong many times, but he couldn't get in touch with Lei Sherdong. A business party was being held at Malibu's Pointy Corner Manor. It had been 2 days since Firefly released a series of news and statements. Although Firefly could completely ignore the creditors' representatives in Los Angeles, it was not in the long-term interest of Firefly. Even if it was a non-listed company, Firefly could not completely break away from the capital market. Not to mention, Eric still developed many industries outside of Firefly. Pension funds and insurance institutions in every state in the United States and European countries were the main investment force of the capital market. Therefore, Eric quickly invited all the creditors' representatives to attend the party at Pointy Corner Manor with the excuse of communication in person to resolve differences. Now that things had developed to this point, there was no need for communication at all. The guests who came to the party did not even mention the creditors' alliance. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that Firefly took the initiative to give them a way out. Originally, some of the creditors were worried about Eric's arrogant attitude. After the creditors' representatives arrived at Pointy Corner Manor, they realized that the owner of Firefly was not arrogant like a teenager. Instead, he was as mature and steady as most of their peers. They were all relieved when they saw how well he treated people. In the conversation that followed, These people even gradually ignored Eric's age. Unknowingly, Eric was surrounded in the middle like a myriad of stars surrounding the moon, discussing various economic and political issues with great interest. If we pay more attention, we can find that a new information technology industry has emerged. Although the academic community has called the development of new energy, information technology, space technology, and biotechnology the third industrial revolution, in fact, the only technology that can really touch the lives of ordinary people is information technology. And we all know that the more popular the industry is at the level of ordinary people, the higher the economic value of the industry. Therefore, in the next 10 or even 20 years, mobile communications, personal computers, application software, and the internet will become the most valuable investment targets. Eric, who was surrounded by a group of creditor representatives and senior fund managers in the corner of the hall, held a glass of red wine in his hand and spoke without any stage fright. A fund manager in a black suit asked, "Eric, I know that outside of Hollywood, you also invested in several high-tech companies such as Cisco, Yahoo, and AOL, but don't you think that high-tech investment is too risky? As far as I know, one of the investment principles of Mr. Warren Buffett, another shareholder of Firefly, is to avoid high-tech industries as much as possible. I won't comment on Warren's investment philosophy. His supporters will drown me in saliva." Amidst the chuckles, Eric continued, "However, in other times, the risk of investing in high-tech industries is indeed very high. But now it's different. What's coming next is an overall industrial explosion because information technology is involved in so many industries, including almost all aspects of our lives. The semiconductor industry promotes the development of personal computers and mobile communications. Personal computers and mobile communications promote the development of application software, mobile phones, and the internet, and the other three can lead to countless huge industrial clusters. In this overall industrial trend, high-tech investment is very guaranteed. I'm sure that in the next few years, the North American and even global capital markets will definitely lead to a new round of long-term bull market pattern because of the development of new technology industries." Another fund manager asked very keenly, "Eric, do you think there will be a bubble?" Of course, every round of the bull market means a stock market bubble. This time, a big industrial explosion will definitely mean a bigger bubble. Eric's eyes had a different meaning. He glanced around at everyone and said with a faint smile, "In the state of the stock market soaring, even if you didn't hear what I said today, I think you will definitely enter the market without hesitation. However, whether you can restrain your greed and successfully escape in the end will depend on your own luck." Seeing that many people fell into a short period of contemplation, Eric didn't continue. He wanted to reveal a little bit of information to leave a deep impression in the hearts of these fund managers with large amounts of capital. It would definitely bring unexpected benefits in the future, but there was no need to say too much. When Eric saw Elizabeth standing outside in a lavender dress and looking at him with a smile, he raised his glass to the crowd and walked out of the crowd. Eric praised Elizabeth's dress and asked, "When did you come?" "It's been half an hour." Elizabeth still had a smile on her face as she said, "Seeing that you're so comfortable with a group of old men, I didn't want to disturb you." Eric walked to the dining table and picked up a fruit platter. He found a sofa with Elizabeth and sat down. He smiled and continued the girl's words. "It can't be helped. If I get too close to men of the same age, it will cause even more unbearable associations. I guess you guys don't want to see such a scene, right?" Elizabeth smiled and patted Eric on the shoulder. She took a sip of red wine and slowly calmed down. She said, "My dad has been regretting it recently." Eric looked up and asked, "Regretting what?" Elizabeth shrugged and said, "Firefly's paper assets. My dad said that if he knew, it would have cost $15. He could buy it for $200 million. News Corporation would definitely buy it." Eric picked up a piece of apple and stuffed it into his mouth. He said, "It's okay. He's an old man. His memory gets worse and worse. He'll forget about it in a few days." Elizabeth said unhappily, "Eric, can't you be a little more respectful to my dad?" "Okay, sorry." Eric also became serious and said, Then, you must be thinking of buying Disney's animation department again, right? Yeah. Elizabeth nodded. She personally trusted Eric's judgment very much. She even worshipped him. Therefore, since Eric still insisted on disbanding the hand-drawn animation department after The Lion King, Elizabeth was not as enthusiastic as the other major Hollywood film companies. But unfortunately, her dad did not think so. Eric said, "Let me tell you, Liz, buying Firefly's paper assets might still be able to maintain a good profit for the next few years. But if you buy the hand-drawn animation department, it's not likely to make money." Elizabeth glanced at Eric. "What's the use of telling me this? You have to tell my dad. I'm not obligated to do that. But don't get involved this time." Eric thought for a while and said, "Even if your dad tries his best, I don't think he'll be able to get it this time." Elizabeth asked curiously, "Oh, which company do you think is most likely to buy the animation department?" Eric recalled some of the information collected by Kelly in the past few days and said, "I think it's most likely Warner. Warner's film business this summer is really terrible. If Terry Semel doesn't do something to give the board of directors and shareholders enough confidence, it'll probably be difficult for him to stay in the CEO position for too long." The second is Paramount. I heard that Paramount plans to use Blockbuster to imitate Disney's strategy, Eric said with a hint of schadenfreude. There are more than 3,000 Blockbuster chain stores in the United States. That's more than 6 times the number of Disney stores in the world. This is indeed a very good idea. Unfortunately, Paramount doesn't have many movies to develop. I don't know why, but I find it funny when I think about it. Haha, sorry, let me laugh. Elizabeth rolled her eyes a little. After Eric finished laughing, she said, "I thought you would think Universal was the most likely. After all, Michael Eisner was once the CEO of Disney." Eric shrugged and said, "Universal and Columbia can forget about it. Michael Eisner definitely wants the animation department, but he doesn't have that much power. Now Universal and Columbia are in the hands of the Japanese. The Japanese are sometimes very generous, but sometimes very stingy. Their animation industry is very developed. Correspondingly, although they won't look down on Hollywood animation companies, they won't be willing to spend more than $1 billion to buy a hand-drawn animation department. Finally, MGM has no hope. As for you guys, I think News Corporation's business focus should be on the TV network. You won't be as desperate as Warner and Paramount, right?" Elizabeth nodded slightly. She had to admit that Eric's analysis was very reasonable. Since Firefly bought ABC and no longer cooperated with Fox, News Corporation had focused most of its energy on operating the TV network this year in order to maintain the market share of Fox. For this reason, they even did not hesitate to let the film department reduce production again. After making up her mind not to try to influence her old man's decision, Elizabeth was relieved and asked, "Hey, didn't you want to take over that comic company recently? Which superhero copyright do you have your eyes on?" "There are too many. Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Hulk, Iron Man and so on. Actually, I'm a comic book fan. Can you tell?" Elizabeth showed a look of disdain and said, "You're talking nonsense again. How come I've never seen you read comics?" Eric smiled and said, "This shows that we still need to understand each other better." Chapter 650. Seeing that Elizabeth still wanted to ask, Eric shook his head and said, "Don't ask about this. I can't explain it clearly now, but Marvel is a big dish. Firefly's family won't be able to finish it. Everyone will have a share." After listening to Eric's nonsense, Elizabeth, who had no intention of continuing the topic, became curious again. If even Firefly can't finish it, then how much potential does Marvel have? Just as she was about to continue asking, a waiter hurried to Eric's side and said a few words in his ear. Eric nodded to the waiter and said to Elizabeth, "Come with me, let's welcome the guest." Elizabeth stood up and asked, "Who is it?" Eric raised his arm to Elizabeth and waited for the girl to hold him. He said, "Terry Semel from Warner, so be more intimate." Elizabeth immediately guessed Eric's intention. If the two of them were intimate, Terry Semel, who came for the Disney animation department, would definitely reevaluate Fox's competitiveness, and Firefly would get a higher price. You actually used me, Elizabeth grumbled, but she still obediently leaned against Eric, and the two of them went out to greet them. Terry Semel had gray hair and a pair of rimless glasses. He had the elegant temperament of a scholar. Although he was just in his early 50s, he had worked in Warner for nearly 20 years. He was one of the important successors trained by Steve Ross. However, after the death of Steve Ross, Terry Semel, who became the CEO of Time Warner after a fierce internal competition, had not been having a good time recently. On the big side, after the merger between Firefly and ABC, Time Warner was immediately kicked off the throne of the media overlord that had been sitting firmly for many years. On the small side, during this hot summer where the total box office once again broke the Hollywood box office record, Time Warner's film and television business went against the trend and reached the lowest level in many years. All of this led to Terry Semel receiving tremendous pressure from all sides almost every day recently. When he heard the news that Firefly was about to sell the Disney animation department, Terry Semel immediately realized that this was a great opportunity to get out of his current predicament. Firefly's starting price of $1 billion was nothing to Time Warner, which had a scale of tens of billions of USD. But if they could take over the animation department, Time Warner would be able to immediately open up the animation film market that they had never been able to open up before. This would be very good news for him personally. After Terry Semel got out of the car, he saw Eric walking towards him. Just as he was about to greet him, he noticed Elizabeth beside Eric. In recent years, Murdoch's outstanding daughter's achievements in Hollywood were obvious to all. Terry Semel had vaguely heard that Elizabeth had a close relationship with Eric. However, as Eric's status increased, the media was afraid of his influence. Hence, there were fewer and fewer reports about his private life. Terry Semel really did not know what the relationship between the two of them was. Seeing Elizabeth holding Eric's arm intimately, Terry Semel's eyes suddenly narrowed. If Eric and Elizabeth were lovers, it would be a big variable in Time Warner's acquisition of Disney's animation department. After all, Fox would definitely not let go of this opportunity easily. Eric noticed the change in Terry Semel's expression. He smiled and took the initiative to extend his hand to the other party. Mr. Semel, welcome to Sharp Corner Manor. Terry Semel quickly put away his thoughts to deal with Eric and greeted Elizabeth warmly. The three of them then walked into the villa. Eric, can we talk alone? Terry Semel whispered to Eric after socializing with the guests in the hall. Eric knew that Terry Semel wanted nothing more than to take over the animation department before the public auction. Perhaps he also wanted to bargain for the copyright of animation such as The Lion King. Anyway, the animation department was the private property of Firefly. The form of sale was up to Eric. However, the animation department was originally just bait that Eric put out to attract the attention of Hollywood. Before he successfully took over Marvel, he did not intend to have any entanglement with the other major companies in this regard. Just as he was about to find an excuse to refuse Terry Semel, he heard someone report that Paramount's CEO, Shirley Lansing, had also arrived at Sharp Corner Manor. Sorry, Mr. Semel, I need to pick someone up. Maybe we can make another appointment. Eric apologized to Terry Semel and walked out of the villa with Elizabeth again. There were no eternal enemies in the business world. Although Lei Sherdong did not appear in person due to the conflict in the process of competing for Disney, he still sent Shirley Lansing, the CEO of Paramount, to come to this party. For many people, the timing was very sensitive. After Shirley Lansing, many important people in Hollywood also arrived one after another. With everyone having their own thoughts, they did not have a chance to contact Eric alone. Although no reporters were invited to the party, the competitive scene at Sharp Corner Manor was immediately spread the next day. Later, Eric simply asked someone to post the list of the animation department's assets and related information on Yahoo, which immediately caused a heated discussion again. The focus of the media's attention was mainly on the seemingly very low auction price of $1 billion. The net profit of The Lion King for Firefly in the next few years would be no less than $1 billion. To sell Disney's animation department to resist the invasion of capital, Eric Williams has undoubtedly made a very crazy, willful, and stupid decision. Although the box office output of Disney's animation department is very low in the revenue of the entire Firefly Group, don't forget that Disney's amusement parks, surrounding stores, and exclusive licensing business all need the locomotive effect of Disney's animation. The box office success of The Lion King further proves that Disney's animation has unlimited economic potential. It's hard for us to imagine where the Disney brand will go after losing Disney's animation department. Although we have no way of knowing why Eric Williams abandoned the Disney animation department, the auction price of $1 billion shows the shrewdness of the Firefly Group. This low pricing strategy will undoubtedly attract more investors who are interested in acquiring the Disney animation department, and then create more intense competition in the auction process. At present, the three local giants in Hollywood, Time Warner, Viacom, and News Corporation, have expressed a strong interest in the Disney animation department. The French Vivendi Group and the Canadian Seagram Group, who intend to enter Hollywood, have also begun to have close contact with the senior management of Firefly. According to the estimates of First B Citibank, the final auction price of the Disney animation department is likely to exceed $2 billion, which will be more than twice the price offered by Firefly. Walt Disney's nephew, Roy Disney, has publicly criticized Eric Williams for wantonly erasing the spirit of Disney, claiming that without the Disney animation department, Walt Disney's philosophy will also be gone. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Walt Disney's daughter, Diana Disney Miller, also expressed extreme disappointment with the Firefly Group's decision. Eric Williams's business talent in film and television has been proven countless times, so I think everyone should have a good reason to pay attention to another thing that happened at the same time as Firefly's sale of the animation department. And that is why Firefly went to such great lengths to seize Marvel Entertainment from Wall Street investor Ron Perlman. Although most media outlets are inclined to believe that this is Firefly Group's retaliation for Ron Perlman's actions of inciting Firefly's creditors, with Eric Williams's outstanding business performance over the years, I absolutely do not believe that this young Hollywood mogul will be so impulsive as to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to retaliate against his enemy. What's more, the whole thing has obviously been carefully planned, and even the legendary investor Warren Buffett is involved. This evidence is enough to prove that the whole thing is not revenge. Perhaps, in the eyes of Eric Williams, Marvel Entertainment is more important than the Disney animation department that created The Lion King. If this is the case, if any bold investor dares to make a move at this time to seize Marvel, there is no doubt that they will reap unexpected rewards. Ron Perlman sat in his luxury car and silently flipped through a thick stack of today's newspapers. In a piece of news about Firefly's upcoming sale of the animation department, he finally saw someone mention Marvel, and the article in the Manhattan Morning Post was almost exactly the same as his recent speculation about Marvel's series of events. However, Ron Perlman did not feel any excitement at finding a confidant at all, because 2 days ago, the New York District Court quickly approved the mandatory bankruptcy protection proposed by Marvel's creditors with astonishing efficiency. Then, with the cooperation of Marvel's CEO Avi Allard, Marvel's creditors, represented by Katzenberg, quickly took control of Marvel's board of directors again. The luxury car slowly stopped outside Marvel's headquarters on 50th Street in Midtown Manhattan. After Ron Perlman got out of the car, he walked into Marvel's office building with his assistant. It happened to be working hours, and a few Marvel employees were waiting for the elevator in the corner of the lobby. When they saw Ron Perlman walk in, they immediately stopped whispering and tiptoed around Ron Perlman, heading toward the safety stairs. Ron Perlman had long known that most of Marvel's employees were very disgusted with him. If it was in the past, he would not have cared about these small fries at all. But today Ron Perlman looked at the Marvel employees who avoided him like he was the plague, and a strong sense of anger suddenly rose in his heart. Clenching his fists, Ron Perlman said in a cold voice to his assistant beside him, "Neil, go record the names of those people, and then inform the Human Resources Department to get lost." Assistant Neil looked at his almost hysterical boss and wanted to remind him of something, but Ron Perlman had already roared, "Even you want to go against me? I'm still the owner of Marvel." Neil did not dare to hesitate at all, and hurriedly walked toward the safety stairs. When he reached the floor of Marvel Entertainment's headquarters, Ron Perlman found that all the lights in the corridor were still on. And not far away, there were people coming in and out of the conference room with documents in their hands. Feeling that something was wrong, Ron Perlman quickened his pace and walked into the conference room. He found that Jeffrey Katzenberg, Avi Allard, and the others were all there, and it was obvious that those who were flipping through various reports and financial data were either lawyers or accountants. Katzenberg, who had faint dark circles under his eyes, looked up from a pile of documents when he heard the reminder from the person next to him. When he saw Ron Perlman, he raised his hand to look at his watch and suddenly said, "It's already 9 o'clock." With that said, Katzenberg stood up from his chair and stretched his body. He ordered his assistant to prepare breakfast for him, and then walked straight to the door. Ron Perlman had long expected that once Firefly took control of Marvel, he would definitely attack Marvel's financial situation first. However, he did not expect that Katzenberg had already led people to start reviewing Marvel's financial documents without any notice at all. This made his suppressed anger erupt again. Seeing Katzenberg walking toward him, Ron Perlman gritted his teeth and said, "You don't have my permission. This is illegal. I will protest to the federal court. I definitely will." Katzenberg stretched his stiff neck and came to Ron Perlman's side. He did not care about Ron Perlman's threat at all. He patted him a few times on the shoulder and said, "Go ahead and protest, Ron. But before that, I think we have to have a good talk first. For example, that $700 million thing." Katzenberg left the meeting room after saying these words. Ron Perlman felt a chill in his heart. The number that Katzenberg had casually said was exactly the same as the amount of Marvel's debt financing that he had embezzled. This probably meant that in just one night, Firefly had grasped enough information. He just did not know that Firefly had roughly grasped this data before launching an attack on Marvel. If there was not enough evidence, the New York District Court would not have approved the bankruptcy protection application of Marvel's creditors so quickly. What Katzenberg was doing at this time was just looking for accurate evidence from Marvel's internal documents. Unable to attack Katzenberg, Ron Perlman unwillingly pointed his finger at Marvel CEO Avi Allard. "Avi, why did you betray me? Don't forget, I supported you to get the position of Marvel CEO. *PS, one more update. Star. Chapter 651. Ron, I'm a professional manager, not a capitalist." Avi Allard pointed to the old office supplies in the conference room and said, "Look at what you've been doing all these years. You only know how to exploit Marvel without restraint. Many people have left in the past few years. The company has no chance of survival, and it's also burdened with huge debts. If this continues, Marvel will definitely die. I'm just saving this company, isn't that right?" Ron Perlman's face was a little embarrassed, but he immediately retorted angrily, "But you shouldn't have betrayed me. If you have any opinions, you can discuss them with me." When Avi Allard heard Ron Perlman's words, he almost laughed out loud. "Ron, don't you remember how many times I almost begged you to discuss with me?" Ron Perlman didn't know if he was angry or embarrassed. He was almost incoherent as he emphasized again, "You. Don't forget, I'm the owner of this company." "You won't be soon." Avi Allard suddenly lost interest in talking to Ron Perlman. He left this sentence coldly and walked out of the conference room. More than half an hour later, Katzenberg, Avi Allard, Ron Perlman, and their respective lawyers gathered in another conference room of Marvel. As if he didn't notice Ron Perlman, who had regained his fighting spirit after calming down, Katzenberg opened a thick stack of documents that he had organized last night, and went straight to the point. "Ron, now you have two choices. First, settle in private. Andrew Holdings will pay a sum of money and buy all the Marvel shares on the market at the current stock price. Then implement a 100% debt-for-equity strategy and hand over Marvel to us. I personally think this is the best way to solve the current situation." Hearing Ron Perlman's cold snort, Katzenberg did not mind. He continued in a cold, formulaic tone. "Then second, we will apply to the SEC to investigate Andrews Holdings' embezzlement of Marvel's debt financing. Although this investigation and the subsequent lawsuit will take a long time, No matter how long it is delayed, with all the evidence, you will still have to return all the debt financing embezzled from Marvel. In addition, you will also face a huge fine from the SEC. I assure you that without $1 billion, you won't be able to win this lawsuit. After spending $1 billion, I think you won't be far from bankruptcy. A middle-aged man sitting next to Ron Perlman said, "Mr. Katzenberg, can I take this as a threat to my client?" Katzenberg glanced at Ron Perlman's lawyer and said with a faint smile, "You should know that I'm in the movie industry, so don't use common lines in movies in this kind of situation. It will make you look very unprofessional." The middle-aged man obviously had the basic thick skin of a lawyer. He didn't mind Katzenberg's sarcasm and insisted, "Mr. Katzenberg, you didn't answer my question." Katzenberg shrugged and said, "I'm not threatening your client. I'm just stating a basic fact and some of Firefly's determination." Ron Perlman stopped the private lawyer who wanted to continue speaking and said to Katzenberg, "Jeffrey, I won't choose either of these two conditions. Don't forget, Marvel's bankruptcy protection period is 1 month. As long as I can come up with a reasonable solution to the current situation within a month, Marvel will still be mine. No one can take it away from me." "That's right, it's 1 month, but," Katzenberg said contemptuously, "you can't come up with any way to revive Marvel because the current Marvel is just an empty shell. Other than the toy department that can barely operate, Marvel Movies is an empty shell, Marvel TV is an empty shell, and the music department is an empty shell. Even Marvel's foundation, the comics department, the 7 chief writers responsible for the creation of popular comics such as X-Men and Fantastic Four have all left 2 years ago. Now it's no different from an empty shell. Mr. Ron Perlman, tell me, how do you plan to revive Marvel?" Ron Perlman shouted at Carson without hesitation, "Don't think that I don't know. Firefly Group doesn't care about what you said at all. What you really want is the copyrights to Marvel superheroes. Let me tell you, you will never succeed. I'd rather sell Marvel to any third party for $1 than give it to Firefly." Katzenberg, who had a fiery temper, also raised his voice. "But you don't have the authority to sell Marvel to a third party for $1, because the federal court won't allow you to do such a thing that harms the interests of creditors. Even if you want to sell, you can only sell to Firefly. Don't even think about it. It's always been me taking things from others. No one can take away what belongs to me. Do you think it's still the 1980s? Go to downtown and take a look. DeChong Securities no longer exists. It's gone." The originally unfriendly meeting soon erupted into a fierce quarrel. Just when the two sides were about to fight, Avi Allard and the other onlookers came back to their senses and hurriedly pulled Katzenberg and Ron Perlman away. Ron Perlman finally calmed down after crazily smashing everything in the office. He left Marvel headquarters with his lawyer and assistant without saying goodbye. Eric, who was in Los Angeles, immediately learned about the conflict between the two from Avi Allard, who was worried that things would change again because of this argument. However, he was not too worried. If he wanted to use gentle means to take down Marvel, Eric could have sent Frank Wells to take charge of this matter. However, doing so would only make Ron Perlman greedy. Katzenberg's strong and irritable personality happened to be able to restrain Ron Perlman's insatiable greed. After the first negotiation ended unhappily, Ron Perlman did not continue to contact Firefly. Instead, he immediately flew to Los Angeles in an attempt to once again transfer Marvel, a burden destined to be lost, to several major Hollywood film companies. However, all eyes were focused on Disney's animation department. No one in Hollywood paid attention to Ron Perlman. Even Michael Eisner, who realized that it was impossible to get Panasonic's support to acquire the animation department, did not intend to make a move because he also regretfully realized that the Japanese would not support Universal because of the conflict between Marvel and Firefly. Subsequently, Ron Perlman still did not give up and tried to sound out some companies interested in the entertainment industry. However, most of the weaker companies did not want to provoke the capital forces represented by the first and second richest people in the UA at the same time. Companies with enough strength also realized that to solve Marvel's dilemma, they needed to invest hundreds of millions of dollars. However, even if they took over Marvel and wanted to develop Marvel's film rights, they still could not do without Hollywood's support. And as the biggest local snake in Hollywood, Firefly certainly would not let these outsiders who stole their prey have a good life. In the end, the loss outweighed the gain. In desperation, Ron Perlman even thought about the long-term bonds of Firefly in his hands. But in the end, nothing was settled. Not to mention that Andrews Holdings' bond was only worth $400 million, which was not enough to make up for Marvel's deficit. Also, aware of Ron Perlman's recent predicament, the investment companies that were interested in taking over the bond offered lower and lower prices, with the highest offer being a 10% discount. It was a loss of $40 million in just a few months. Ron Perlman also found it hard to accept. More than a week passed like this. Firefly did not seem to have the slightest intention of urging, but Ron Perlman found that he was at a dead end. If the stalemate continued, and he still could not come up with any feasible company restructuring measures after a month of bankruptcy protection, Marvel would face forced bankruptcy liquidation. Early in the morning of August 21st, Avi Allard had just sat down in his office when he received a call from Ron Perlman. The hoarse voice on the phone barely maintained the last bit of strength. "I don't want to see Jeffrey Katzenberg again. I want Eric Williams to talk to me in person." Start at your tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.